He grabbed her wrist before she could step away from the pastry cart. Not a gentle touch. Not an accident. Adrian Cole's fingers locked around Nia Brooks's wrist like he owned her, and he smiled while he did it. Bright, charming, the kind of smile that expected no consequences. "Come on," he said. "Have one. You look like you could use something sweet." Nia laughed, nervous and small, the way she always laughed when she didn't know how to say no. She didn't see what happened above her head. 40 feet away, behind floor-to-ceiling glass, Kang Dojin had gone completely still. He wasn't moving. He wasn't breathing. His coffee sat forgotten on the edge of his desk, and every person in that building who had ever learned to read the chairman's silence knew, without looking up, without being told, that something in the room had just shifted into dangerous territory. His assistant, Park Sung-il, took one look at Dojin's face and quietly stepped backward out of the office. If you've ever been the person everyone looks through instead of at, if you've ever made yourself smaller so the room felt more comfortable, then you already know exactly who Nia Brooks was before this morning changed her life forever. And if you've ever been loved in secret by someone who would burn the world down for you while you smiled at the wrong person, then you know exactly how close she came to losing everything. Hit the like button right now if you're staying until the end, and drop your city or country in the comments. I want to see how far this story has traveled. Subscribe so you never miss what comes next. Because this one goes places you won't see coming. Poko. Nia Brooks had a system for surviving Haesung International Group. It was not a complicated system. It did not require brilliance or courage or anything that might get her noticed. The system was, in its entirety, this: arrive early, stay late, do the work nobody else wanted to do, and under absolutely no circumstances make anyone feel like they had to pay attention to you. She'd been running this system for 2 years. It worked perfectly. She was the secretary to the executive floor, which, in practice, meant she was the secretary to every person on the executive floor simultaneously, because the actual executive assistants considered her a resource rather than a colleague. She booked their travel. She reformatted their presentation decks at 11 at night. She memorized shipping schedules so that when someone needed a document pulled from 18 months ago at 7 in the morning, she could produce it from memory before they finished asking. Nobody knew she did this. That was the point. At 26, Nia had developed an almost architectural understanding of invisibility. She dressed in dark colors and loose cuts. She wore her hair pulled back because it took up less space that way. She had trained herself out of the habit of taking up the armrest on the elevator, of clearing her throat before speaking, of anything that might draw the eye or prompt the thought, "Who is that?" The answer, she had long since decided, was nobody important, nobody you need to worry about. She had grown up being told, sometimes directly, more often through the specific silence that followed her into rooms, that this was the correct relationship to have with the world. Take up less. Apologize first. Smile at everyone so nobody gets the idea you think you're something. It had never not worked. Until the morning, Adrian Cole came rolling his pastry cart through the executive floor lobby, and the entire careful architecture of her invisible life began, without warning, to collapse. She heard him before she saw him. A voice like warm water, easy, accented with something that wasn't quite American and wasn't quite British, calibrated to put people at ease. He was talking to the receptionist, Hyojin, who was giggling in a way Hyojin almost never giggled at 7:45 in the morning. Nia didn't look up from the customs manifest she was cross-referencing against the February shipping log. She had 30 minutes before the executive floor filled up, and the discrepancy in container weights between Busan and Incheon wasn't going to resolve itself. "You work too hard," said the voice, very close. She looked up. He was standing 2 feet from her desk, holding a small paper bag. Medium height, broad-shouldered, with the kind of face that seemed engineered to appear trustworthy. He had the easy confidence of a man who had never once worried about taking up too much space. "I'm sorry?" Nia said. "The pastry cart." He tilted his head toward the lobby where a cart sat, laden with croissants and small things wrapped in wax paper. "I brought them up for the team meeting, but the meeting got pushed to 9. These are going to go stale." He set the bag on the corner of her desk. "You should have one." "Oh." Nia looked at the bag. "I'm fine, thank you." "You've been here since 6:30. He said it like a statement, not a question. That made her pause. She looked at him more carefully. He was watching her with genuine attention, not the performance of attention that people offered when they needed something, but actual interest, like she was a problem he found genuinely worth solving. I had some catching up to do, she said. Nia, right? He smiled. I'm Adrian. I'm with the financial audit team. We came in from the Singapore office. He extended his hand and she shook it briefly, and he didn't hold on too long. That registered in the part of her brain that tracked such things. You've been doing this department's logistics work for how long? 2 years. 2 years? He shook his head slowly. And I'm guessing the executive team takes about 40% of the credit? She didn't answer, but she smiled, genuinely, briefly, in spite of herself, because the number was closer to 60, and something about hearing it said out loud felt, for a moment, like air after a very long time underwater. Adrian Cole caught that smile and grinned back at her. He held out the bag again. Please. The almond croissants are actually good, I checked. She took it. She would think about that later, the specific moment she reached out and took the bag, and wonder at how small a gesture it was, how completely ordinary, how entirely it did not feel like the thing that would change the rest of her life. She was still holding the bag when she heard the sound. Not a sound, exactly. More of an absence of sound. The executive floor of Haesung International operated at a specific ambient noise level that Nia had, over 2 years, internalized completely. The click of keyboards, the soft percussion of someone's heel on marble, the ventilation system. Park Sung-il on the phone with Tokyo, always at this hour. Park Sung-il was not on the phone. The keyboards had stopped. The heel clicks had stopped. Nia looked up toward the chairman's office. The glass was clear. Dojin had not frosted it this morning, which was unusual. He frosted it for calls, for meetings, for any moment when he wanted to be unobserved. The glass was clear, which meant he could be seen, and he was standing at his desk, and he was not doing anything. He was looking at her. She had worked on this floor for 2 years. In 2 years, Chairman Kong Dojin had spoken to her directly perhaps 4 times. He was known, universally, as a man of extraordinary precision. In his words, his schedule, his appearance, his expectations. He ran Haesung International with a control so complete that people said the company breathed when he told it to and held its breath when he didn't. He was looking at her right now with an expression she had never seen on any human face. She did not know what to call it. It wasn't anger exactly. It was something beneath anger, something older and more animal than anger. His jaw was set. His shoulders were squared. And his eyes, which she had always privately considered the most unreadable eyes she'd ever encountered, black and still as a lake nobody swam in, were fixed on her with an intensity that made her stomach tighten in ways she could not explain. She looked away. She looked back at Adrian, who was still talking. Something about the Singapore office, something about the audit timeline, something that required a response. I'm sorry, she said. What was that? Adrian glanced up toward the chairman's office. Seemed to clock something. Looked back at Nia with that same easy smile, but she caught, just briefly, something shift behind his eyes. Something like satisfaction. I said, he repeated, maybe we could have coffee sometime. Easier to talk logistics over something warm. Oh, Nia said. Sure, maybe. It was a non-answer. She gave it without thinking. The kind of answer she'd perfected over years of deflecting invitations without creating friction. But she was smiling when she said it. That small, real smile that had appeared earlier, still not entirely gone from her face. Adrian Cole nodded and collected his cart and walked back toward the elevator. Nia watched him go. Then she heard it. The sound of a door. Not slamming. Dojin never slammed anything. But the chairman's office door opened with a particular controlled precision that, in Nia's 2 years of peripheral experience, meant something was about to happen that hadn't been scheduled. Park Sung-il appeared at her desk approximately 4 seconds later. His face was professional and completely blank, which meant he was working very hard at it. Miss Brooks, he said, the chairman would like to see you. Nia looked at the customs manifest on her desk, the container discrepancy, the February log. Now? She said. Yes, said Park Sung-il. Now. She had been inside the chairman's office twice in 2 years. The first time was her second week, when she'd delivered a misfiled contract, and Dojin had looked at it, looked at her, said, "The date on the amendment is wrong," and turned back to his screen. She'd fixed the date, returned it, left. He had not looked up again. The second time was 6 months ago, when the Tokyo shipping partner had sent an emergency revision at 11 at night, and the executive assistant was unreachable, and Nia had taken it upon herself to draft a response and slip it under his office door with a note explaining the situation. She'd been in the elevator when her phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. It said, "Revision approved. Good catch." She'd stood in the elevator for a long time staring at that text before she understood it was from him. This was the third time. The office smelled like cedar and something cooler that she couldn't name. His desk was clear except for a single folder and the coffee cup she'd seen him standing next to, which was, she noticed now, sitting exactly where it had been. Untouched, probably cold. Dojin was standing at the window with his back to her. He was in a dark suit, no tie, which was also unusual. His hands were clasped behind his back. He was looking out over the Han River, which was gray and flat and distant under the morning clouds. Nia stood in the center of the room and waited. 12 seconds. She counted. "Close the door," he said. She turned and closed it. She heard the electronic lock engage, a sound she hadn't heard from inside the office before, and realized, with a slow and specific chill, that the door had been locked from his end. She turned back around. He had turned to face her. Kang Dojin was 32 years old. He had taken over Haesung International at 27 under circumstances that the business press described as turbulent, and that people who actually worked in the building described in much quieter voices as something else entirely. He was not the tallest man she'd ever encountered, but he had the quality of filling space precisely, not aggressively, not demonstratively, but with the calm completeness of someone who had never once questioned his right to be in any room he entered. He was looking at her with that same expression from through the glass, and up close it was worse. Up close she could see it for what it was. "Sit down," he said. "I have the February shipping log." "Sit down, Nia." It was the first time he had ever said her name. Not Miss Brooks. Not the secretary. Her name, with the same precise control he put into everything else, like he had thought about how to say it and decided on this. She sat. He crossed the room and sat across from her, and for a long moment he just looked at her. Not through her, the way most of the executive floor looked at her. At her. Like he was reading something. "Adrian Cole," he said. "He's with the audit team from Singapore. He is not with the audit team from Singapore." His voice was perfectly level. "There is no audit team from Singapore. The Singapore office does not exist in any functional capacity. It was established 14 months ago as a shell entity and has processed exactly 3 transactions, all of which trace back to a holding company registered in the Cayman Islands under a name you would not recognize." Nia stared at him. "Who is he?" she said. Dojin was quiet for a moment. His hands rested on the arms of the chair. He seemed to be making a decision. She could see it, the internal weighing, the calculation running beneath the surface. And then something in his expression shifted, just slightly, into something that might have been a kind of resignation. "His real name is Seo Min-jae," said Kang Dojin, "and before I explain what that means, I need to tell you something that I should have told you a long time ago." He paused. "You have never been invisible. Not once. Not for a single day of the 2 years you've worked in this building." The ventilation system hummed. Outside, the Han River sat flat and gray and indifferent. Nia said, "What?" "The apartment building on Mapo, where you've lived for the past 18 months. I own it. Not Haesung International. Me, personally, through a company you have no reason to have heard of." He held her eyes. "The building manager's name is Cho. He reports to me. The security camera that was broken for 6 weeks on your floor. I had it repaired 4 days after you moved in." She was very still. "The man who followed you from the Mapo station in February last year. He was arrested 2 days later for an unrelated charge." A pause. "It was not unrelated." "What are you telling me?" she said. Her voice came out very flat and very controlled, which was the only voice she had left. "I'm telling you," said Kang Dojin, "that for 2 years I have watched over you. That I have removed threats to your safety before you encountered them. That I know your coffee order, your route to work, the name of the tailor who shortened your coat in March, and the specific frequency with which you work past 9 at night. He looked at her without flinching. And I'm telling you this now because Seo Min-jae didn't come here for an audit, and he didn't sit next to your desk this morning by accident. The room was very quiet. Nia's hands were in her lap and she was looking at them, and she was doing the thing she did when she needed to organize information that was coming in too fast, breaking it into component parts, finding the logistics of it, the structure. The apartment. 18 months. The man at the station. February, 2 years. You've been watching me, she said. Yes. For 2 years. Yes. She looked up. Why? He looked at her for a long time, and Kang Do-jin, who ran one of Seoul's largest corporations, who controlled shipping routes and casinos and things that did not appear in any annual report, who had not been known to feel, visibly, anything, in the memory of anyone who had ever worked for him. Kang Do-jin looked at the woman sitting across from him and said very quietly, "Because you are the only person in this building who never once tried to make me notice her. And I noticed you anyway. And then I couldn't stop." Outside, Seoul was waking up. The Han River caught a strip of pale light where the clouds had broken. Nia sat very still with her hands in her lap. She thought about the February manifest with its unsolved container discrepancy still sitting on her desk. She thought about Adrian Cole's fingers around her wrist, the specific weight of them. She thought about the way his smile had shifted when he caught sight of Dojin's office. "He's going to hurt this company," she said. Dojin's eyes sharpened. "Yes," he said. "Through me," she said. A pause. "We believe so." "You locked the door," she said, "because you're afraid that if I walk out of here, he'll know you've told me." The look on Dojin's face changed again, and this time she recognized it, because she had felt it herself occasionally, when someone finally saw what she was doing without being told. It was the look of a person being surprised by someone they had underestimated. "Yes," he said. Nia looked at her hands. She thought about 2 years of manifests and shipping logs and container weights and executive calendars that nobody else had bothered to memorize. She thought about the discrepancy in the February log, the container weights that didn't align, the inch-in numbers that had been nagging at the back of her mind since 6:30 this morning. She looked up. "I need a whiteboard," she said. Dojin looked at her. "I think I know where he's going to move the money," she said. "And I think I can prove it. But I need a whiteboard, and I need the last 18 months of Haesung's inbound cargo manifests, and I need you to not look at me like that." "Like what?" said Dojin. "Like you're surprised I have a brain," she said. "You've been watching me for 2 years. You should have figured that out by now." There was a long pause. Kang Dojin stood up, walked to the wall panel beside his desk, and pressed a switch. A whiteboard panel slid out from the wall. Large, clean, equipped. He turned around. "The manifests," he said, "are already in the system. I'll have Sung-il pull them." He crossed to his desk and picked up his phone. Then he stopped. He looked at her again, and something in his expression was different from anything she'd seen on it before. Less controlled, more human, the specific face of a man who had been carrying something very heavy alone for a very long time. "Nia," he said. "Don't," she said. "I haven't said anything." "I know what you were going to say." She stood up, picked up a marker from the whiteboard tray. "There's time for that later. Right now we have a problem." She uncapped the marker. Her hand was shaking slightly, and she didn't try to hide it. "Let's solve it." Outside the locked door, the executive floor of Haesung International Group continued its morning at its usual ambient noise level. Nobody knew that inside that office, the entire shape of Nia Brooks's life had just irrevocably changed. Nobody would know, until much later, exactly how far the consequences would reach. But the February manifest was on her mind. The container weights, the inch-on discrepancy. And somewhere on the executive floor, Seo Min-jae, who called himself Adrian Cole, who had a warm voice and careful hands and a smile engineered to lower defenses, was waiting for a plan that had already been set in motion. He had no idea she'd already started pulling the thread. The whiteboard filled up faster than Park Sung-il had ever seen anything fill up in his 11 years working for Kang Do-jin. He stood near the office door, which had been unlocked now, but only barely, only enough for him to bring in the manifests on a tablet and set them on the edge of the desk, and watched the chairman's secretary write in a hand that was small and precise and slightly slanted, The kind of handwriting that belonged to someone who had spent years producing documents that needed to be legible under pressure. She wasn't talking while she wrote. She hadn't asked for water or coffee or a chair. She was standing at the whiteboard in her dark cardigan with the marker uncapped, filling columns with container numbers and dates and port codes, and Dojin was standing 6 feet behind her with his arms crossed and his phone in his hand, and he was reading as fast as she was writing. Sung-il had worked for this man for 11 years. He had seen him manage hostile corporate takeovers, broker agreements between organizations that had been trying to destroy each other for decades, and remain composed during incidents that Sung-il would carry in the back of his skull for the rest of his life. He had never seen Dojin look at anything the way he was looking at Nia Brooks's handwriting on that whiteboard. The February discrepancy, Nia said, still writing. It's not a clerical error. The weight variance between the Busan arrival manifest and the Incheon transfer record is too consistent. Clerical errors distribute randomly. This is 12.4 tons every time across 6 separate container lots. That's not a mistake. That's a number someone chose. Dojin uncrossed his arms. Chosen to hide what? Secondary cargo. She capped the marker, turned around. Someone's been running a secondary load inside the declared shipments. Same containers, same routing, different contents from what's documented. The weight's been split across the manifest categories, so no single line item triggers a customs flag. She looked at the tablet on the desk. Can you pull the customs officer sign-offs on those 6 lots? Dojin looked at Sung-il. Sung-il was already on it. What? The name that came back was Officer Lim Byung-tae, Busan Port, Customs Division, 17-year record, 1 formal commendation, and no disciplinary flags. Officer Lim Byung-tae had approved all 6 of the anomalous container lots. Nia looked at that name for a long time. He's not corrupt, she said, finally. Dojin said, What makes you say that? Because if he were corrupt, he'd have distributed the approvals. 6 consecutive sign-offs from one officer would be the first thing in audit flags. She tapped the tablet. He approved them because the paperwork was clean. Whoever built those manifests knew exactly what Lim Byung-tae's approval thresholds looked like. They reverse-engineered the documentation around his habits. She paused. Which means whoever built this has been watching the port's customs patterns for at least 8 months, probably longer. Dojin was quiet. Seo Min-jae didn't set this up in the 3 days since he arrived, Nia said. This was running before he got here. He's not the architect. He's the trigger. The room was very quiet for a moment. Then Dojin picked up his phone and made a call, and the language he spoke into it was Korean, and the voice on the other end said something short, and Dojin said something shorter and ended the call. And when he looked back at Nia, his expression had shifted into something that was entirely chairman, and not at all the man who had 20 minutes ago told her she was the only person he couldn't stop watching. I need you to stay in this office, he said. I have work. I know what you have. Sung-il will manage the floor. He set the phone down. What I need right now is for you to stay in this room and keep going. The manifests, the container patterns, the customs routes. Everything you know about the inbound cargo logistics for the last 2 years. Write it all down. She looked at him. You think Minji's going to move today? I think he came here for something specific, and I think your name is on the access credential. He needs to get it. He held her eyes. So yes, I think today. Seo Minju was drinking tea in the 3rd floor conference room when his phone buzzed. He didn't look at it immediately. He was in the middle of a conversation with 2 members of the financial team about the Q4 variance report, a conversation he was sustaining effortlessly, with just enough technical fluency to seem legitimate and just enough deferential curiosity to seem non-threatening. He had been doing this for 3 weeks. It had become, if he was honest, almost boring. The tea was good. Haesung's kitchen staff was meticulous. He excused himself for the restroom. In the corridor, he checked his phone. The message was from a contact listed as a sole equipment vendor. It said, 3rd floor elevator lobby. 10 minutes. Deviation from schedule. Confirm. Min-jae typed back a single character and pocketed the phone. Then he stood very still in the corridor for a moment, looking at the elevator bank. He thought about the secretary. The real one. Not the performance he'd given her this morning, but what he'd actually seen when he looked at her. She was sharper than the brief had suggested. He'd expected someone soft and grateful and easy to redirect. He'd handed her the pastry and used just enough warmth to earn that smile, and he'd gotten what he came for, a reason to be at her desk, visible to the chairman's line of sight at the exact moment he needed to be visible. But she'd covered the smile too fast, and the way she'd looked at the manila envelope on her desk, with the February shipping log open beneath it, like she was still working a problem in her head while talking to him. He pushed the thought away. It didn't matter. By the time she figured out anything worth knowing, the transaction would be complete. The malware had been installed through her workstation 3 days ago, during a morning when she'd stepped away from her desk for exactly 11 minutes to fix a jammed printer on the 4th floor. The installer had taken 4 minutes. It had been running since then, mapping the financial network's architecture, waiting for his signal. He needed 2 things: her login credentials, which he already had, and the internal authorization code that the network required for wire transfers above a specific threshold. That code refreshed every 48 hours and lived only in the senior executive system, the one that Nia Brooks accessed daily without knowing what she was accessing, because she was meticulous and thorough and routinely pulled data from systems she was authorized to use but not trained to understand. She had pulled from the senior system twice this week already. Both times, the malware had logged her keystrokes. He had the code. He had the credentials. He needed 4 minutes uninterrupted, and he had arranged those 4 minutes to coincide with the morning security desk change, which happened at exactly 8:55. It was 8:47. Minjae straightened his jacket and walked toward the elevator. Nia was writing container codes when the fire alarm went off. It was not loud. Haesung International's alarm system was, like everything else in the building, precisely calibrated. A tone firm enough to be legally compliant and controlled enough to avoid panic, in a building full of people who made decisions that affected hundreds of millions of dollars daily. But it was enough to make Sung-il appear in the doorway immediately. "Floor drill," he said. "3rd floor alarm triggered." Dojin looked at Nia. "Stay." "I'm not going anywhere," she said, because the February manifest was still unfinished, and she had just found a 7th container lot with the same 12.4-ton variants, and she was not done. Dojin left. The executive floor began to empty. The quiet shuffle of people who knew the procedure, the click of keyboards being locked, the swipe of cards. Nia stood at the whiteboard alone. She looked at the 7th container number. Then she looked at the tablet on the desk, where the custom sign-off records were still open, and something in her chest tightened without warning. Lim Byung-tae had approved 6 lots. The 7th lot had a different approving officer, someone she hadn't seen before, an officer whose sign-off date was 5 days ago, last Thursday. The same Thursday that Adrian Cole had arrived in the building for the first time. She picked up the tablet. She started scrolling. The 7th lot's declared cargo was machinery parts, origin, Singapore. And the consignee on the transfer document was a subsidiary she recognized, one she booked freight authorization for routinely, one whose system login she used weekly because the executive who managed the subsidiary account had been on extended medical leave for 4 months, and the work had quietly transferred to her desk without anyone formally restructuring the authorization. She had the login to that subsidiary's account. She used it every Tuesday. She stood in the empty office with the tablet in her hands and understood, with the specific clarity of someone who had spent 2 years tracking every small administrative detail nobody else wanted to track, exactly what had been built around her. Not just access, a trail. Her credentials, her logins, her name on every authorization related to the subsidiary that was receiving that 7th shipment. If the money moved today, every record would point here, to her workstation, to her codes, to her name on document after document going back 18 months. She set the tablet down very carefully on the desk. Then she picked it back up and photographed every screen she could access. The fire alarm lasted 9 minutes. When Dojin came back through the door, Nia was standing in the center of the room with the tablet held out toward him like evidence. "It wasn't a drill," she said. "He triggered it. He needed the floor empty." Dojin looked at the screen. Something moved across his face that she still didn't have a word for. "Sung-il," he said. Sung-il was already in the doorway. "The 3rd floor East Utility Corridor accessed at 8:51. Keycard trace says the access was yours, sir." Sung-il's voice was entirely flat. "You were on the executive floor at 8:51. "Spoofed," Dojin said. "Yes, sir." Where is he now? Conference room 3. He came back with the rest of the floor. Sung-il paused. He's drinking tea. Dojin was quiet for 4 seconds. Nia counted. The subsidiary account, he said to Nia quietly. Nara Shipping Solutions. I have authorization on the account. I use it every Tuesday. He would have had my keystrokes from whatever he installed on my workstation. She paused. I didn't know. I need you to know that. I know, he said. Dojin? I know, he said again, and his voice was not the chairman's voice anymore. It was lower and more human, and she understood that this was one of the very few times those 2 registers were going to exist in the same room at the same time. Has the transfer happened? Sung-il checked his phone. Not yet. Network monitoring shows an anomalous authorization sequence initiated at 8:53. The transfer is queued. It hasn't cleared. How long? The network requires a secondary confirmation code. Senior Executive Authorization. The code refreshes in... Sung-il stopped. 14 minutes. If the code refreshed before the transfer cleared, Min-jae would have to wait 48 hours. He would know the window had closed. He would move. 14 minutes. Dojin turned to the window. His reflection was dark against the gray river outside. Nia watched him from behind, watched the specific quality of stillness that settled over him. Not calm, not composure, but the particular stillness of someone calculating damage. Then he turned around. Get Jae-won, he said to Sung-il, and tell him to bring Choi. Sung-il went. Dojin looked at Nia. I need you to go back to your desk. She stared at him. You want me to walk out there? I need him to believe nothing has changed. His voice was very level. If you're not at your desk, he'll know the window's closing. He'll accelerate. And if he accelerates? Then the transfer clears before we can stop it, and 14 billion won disappears into an account structure that will take us 3 months to unwrap. He held her eyes. I need you to sit at your desk for 12 minutes and do exactly what you do every morning, and I need you to not look at him. Nia thought about the pastry bag still sitting on the corner of her desk. She thought about Adrian Cole's fingers around her wrist, the specific weight of them. Don't smile at him, Dojin said. She looked at him. I mean it, he said, and there was nothing composed or controlled about the way he said it. It was raw and it was quiet, and it was the voice of someone who had been watching her smile at the wrong person through 40 feet of glass and hadn't survived it gracefully. Don't. She picked up her cardigan from the back of the chair. 12 minutes, she said. Listen. Walking back to her desk felt like walking through water. The executive floor had refilled normally, keyboards clicking, someone's heel on marble. Hyojin at the reception desk, resetting her screensaver with a practice swipe. Min-jae was visible through the glass of conference room 3, his back to the corridor, his posture relaxed. Nia sat down. She opened the February manifest. She stared at the container numbers. Her hands were completely still. Inside her chest, her heart was not. At the 8-minute mark, one of Dojin's lieutenants, a man she knew only as Jae-won, broad-shouldered, always quiet, who she had spent 2 years assuming was Dojin's personal driver, walked through the executive floor lobby toward the stairwell. He wasn't running. He wasn't looking at anything. He could have been anyone going anywhere. He wasn't. At the 10-minute mark, her screen flickered. Just once, just barely. A micro dropout that most people wouldn't notice. Nia noticed because she'd been noticing things people didn't think to notice for 2 years. The anomalous authorization sequence had just been interrupted. She kept her eyes on the manifest. At the 11-minute mark, she heard the door to conference room 3 open. She didn't look up. Footsteps in the corridor. Unhurried. 2 sets, Min-jae's and one other. They stopped. She felt the attention before she felt anything else. The specific weight of someone looking at her, not casually, not peripherally, but with the focused quality of someone reassessing. She did not look up. Then Min-jae's voice. Miss Brooks. Easy, warm, perfectly pitched. I wanted to apologize. The pastry this morning, I hope it wasn't too forward. Her fingers were on the keyboard. She made herself type. Something, anything. The letters didn't matter. It was fine, she said. Thank you. You were working late last night? Always. She turned a page in the manifest. Audit week tends to back up. A pause. Of course. Another pause, shorter. The chairman had you in his office this morning. She looked up. She made herself do it slowly, made herself arrange her face into the particular expression she'd spent 26 years perfecting. Pleasant, slightly blank, utterly unthreatening. He had a question about a February shipping record, she said. I pulled the file. Min-jae looked at her for a long moment. His eyes were very still. She understood, with the kind of understanding that lives in the body before the brain catches up, that behind those eyes something very precise was running. Then he smiled. Of course, he said. Good work. He walked away. She turned back to the manifest. Her hands were shaking. She put them flat on the desk until they stopped. 30 seconds later, her desk phone rang. Internal line, no extension display. She picked it up. Come back, said Dojin. She stood up. She didn't look at Min-jae's retreating back. She didn't look at Hyojin or the window or the Han River visible in the gap between buildings. She walked back to the chairman's office with the manifest folder tucked under her arm and her spine very straight and her face arranged in an expression that said, this is routine, this is nothing, there is nothing to see here. She got through the door before the composure broke. Not completely, not dramatically, just a single sharp exhale, the kind that escapes before you can stop it, the kind that tells the body, okay, we're safe for 2 seconds, you can stop performing now. Dojin was at his desk. He looked up when she came in. The transfer was stopped, he said. I know, I saw the screen. He knows the sequence was interrupted. He'll know within the next few minutes that the queue was canceled. Dojin set down the phone he'd been holding. He'll try to run. Let him. We can't. Dojin stood up. If he runs before we have confirmation of what he came here to fund, if we take him on the financial charge alone, his organization will complete the arrangement without him. They don't need him here for the transaction. He looked at her. We need to know what the money was for. Nia opened the manifest folder. She set it on his desk, face up, pointing to the 7th container number. I already know, she said. He looked down. Nara Shipping Solutions is receiving a cargo lot this week. Thursday arrival, Busan port declared as industrial machinery. She tapped the container number. 12.4 tons variance. Same pattern as the others, except this time the weight is all front-loaded into one container, not distributed. She looked up. You don't distribute weight that way unless you can't afford the cargo shifting, unless it's not machinery. Dojin was looking at the number. Something had changed in his face, a tightening around the jaw that she was beginning to recognize as the outermost edge of controlled alarm. Have you run the container dimensions against standard industrial classifications? He said. I don't need to. She picked up the tablet, pulled up the port entry from the Nara account she'd photographed 30 minutes ago. The container's flagged for priority offload. That's a customs designation for time-sensitive biological or chemical materials. She handed him the tablet. Industrial machinery doesn't go stale. The room was very quiet. How much does 12.4 tons of military-grade material cost? She said, on the kind of market that doesn't file paperwork. Dojin looked at her. About 14 billion won, he said. She nodded. They never wanted the money, she said. They needed the transfer completed and documented in Haesung's name so that when the weapons arrive, the purchase chain traces back to this company, not to them. She paused. The rival organization gets the weapons, and Haesung International gets connected to an illegal arms import. She paused again. Which means the police have a basis to investigate. Which means every financial record in this building gets scrutinized. Which means everything underneath the company becomes visible, Dojin said. Yes. The Han River was flat and silent outside the window. Somewhere on the executive floor, Seo Min-jae was calculating his exit. Nia looked at Dojin. You have until Thursday, she said, before that shipment arrives. He looked at her for a moment. Then he picked up his phone and typed something and set it back down. And when he looked up, his face had settled into the specific configuration that Nia understood, instinctively, meant there was no longer any version of this situation that did not require a certain kind of response. I need you somewhere safe, he said. I need to finish the manifest. Nia. His voice was not a command. It was lower than a command. It was the voice of someone who was afraid and not doing very well at hiding it, and not, for once, trying to. Please. She looked at him. She looked at the whiteboard with its columns of container numbers and port codes, and the weight variance that had started all of this at 6:30 this morning. She looked at the pastry bag still sitting on the corner of her desk where she'd left it. She thought about Adrian Cole's fingers around her wrist. Then she thought about Dojin standing at his window for 12 seconds while she waited and counted, and the way he'd said her name, just her name, not her title, as if the name itself was the thing he'd been carrying. And she thought about 18 months in an apartment building he owned, with a security camera he'd had fixed 4 days after she moved in. She thought, I have been loved in secret by someone who would burn things down for me, and I spent 2 years being grateful nobody was paying attention. Okay, she said. But before she could move, the building's internal alarm system activated. Not the fire alarm this time, not the precise calibrated tone, but the security alert, which was different, which meant something had triggered the motion sensors on the parking structure level. Sungul's voice came through Dojin's desk speaker immediately. Chairman, he's in the parking structure. He's not alone. Dojin was already moving. Nia grabbed the manifest folder. Leave it, Dojin started. I'm not leaving it, she said, and the specific flatness of her voice settled the argument before it could begin. He looked at her. 1 second. Stay behind me, he said. She followed him through the door into a building that was no longer the same building it had been at 7:45 this morning when she had been no one, and the worst problem in her life was a discrepancy in the February shipping log, and Kong Dojin was a man behind glass who had never said her name. The elevator opened. They got in. The doors closed. In the parking structure below them, Seo Min-jae was making a phone call, and the voice on the other end said 4 words that changed the timeline of everything. The shipment moved early. The elevator dropped 2 floors before Dojin's phone rang. He answered it without looking at the screen. Talk. Chaewon's voice came through compressed and fast. He's not alone down here. I count 4. 2 by the east exit, 1 at the vehicle bay, 1 I can't place. They came up from the basement access, the service tunnel that connects to the building next door. A pause. Chairman, they had key cards. Dojin said nothing for exactly 1 second. Whose key cards? Running them now. Another pause, shorter. They're registered to maintenance staff. 3 of them filed paperwork for a routine HVAC inspection this morning, approved by facilities management at 7:15. Who approved it? Silence. Jaewon. Deputy Facilities Manager, Han Soo-chang, sir. Jaewon's voice had gone very flat. He's been with the company for 9 years. The elevator reached the parking level and stopped. Dojin did not press the door open button. Nia watched him process the information. It happened in his shoulders first, a specific tightening, barely visible, the kind of physical response that the body produces before the mind has finished the calculation. Then his jaw. Then his hands, which had been holding the phone loosely and were now holding it differently. Pull Han Soo-chang, he said, quietly. Don't use the security team. He paused. Use Choi. Yes, sir. He ended the call. The elevator doors stayed closed. The parking level hummed beyond them. Ventilation, the distant sound of a vehicle somewhere on an upper deck. How deep does it go? Nia said. She hadn't meant to say it out loud. But Dojin turned to look at her, and she held his gaze because the alternative was to look at the elevator doors and pretend she wasn't doing the math in her head, and she was already too far into the math to stop. 9 years. Han Soo-chang had been with the company for 9 years. The container pattern in the manifest went back 18 months. The subsidiary account, Nara Shipping Solutions, had been established 22 months ago. I don't know yet, Dojin said. It was possibly the most honest thing she'd ever heard him say. But we're not going down there. He pressed the button for the 14th floor. The 14th floor was not on the public directory. Nia had known it existed the way she knew most things about the building, peripherally, through the administrative residue it left on documents she processed. Freight deliveries logged to 14, maintenance requests with restricted access codes. An elevator override that appeared in the building's scheduling system on the second Tuesday of every month and was logged simply as executive use. She had never been above 12. The doors opened onto a corridor that smelled like recycled air and concrete. Unfinished, deliberately so, the kind of space that was never intended to be seen. Fluorescent lights, a single door at the end with a biometric panel. Dojin walked to it without hesitating, pressed his palm. The door opened. Inside was a room that looked like the inside of a very serious person's mind. Monitors on 3 walls, a central table, 2 workstations currently occupied by people who looked up when they entered and then looked immediately at Dojin for instructions. Maps on 1 wall. Actual physical maps, paper, pinned with markers. A whiteboard with Korean text she could mostly read, and a few symbols she couldn't. One of the people at the workstations, a woman, early 30s, with the kind of cropped hair that suggested function over decision, stood immediately. "The transfer attempt has been fully traced," she said, without greeting. "The authorization originated from Workstation 7 on the executive floor, Miss Brooks's station." She looked at Nia without warmth, but also without accusation. "The malware was installed 12 days ago. It was dormant for 9 days and activated 72 hours ago." "I know," Nia said. The woman, Dojin would call her Yuna, and she would not offer a last name, looked at Dojin. "The shipment timeline has changed. We're getting updated manifest from the Busan Harbor Authority. The container lot that was scheduled for Thursday arrival. Moved early," Dojin said. Yuna's expression shifted by about 2 millimeters. "Arrived at 0400 this morning. It's already at the terminal." The room was quiet except for the monitors. Nia set the manifest folder on the table. "Which terminal?" Yuna looked at the folder, then at Nia. Something shifted in her assessment. The specific recalibration of someone who came in expecting one thing and is encountering another. "North Pier, Terminal 7. Yuna turned back to her monitor. "Container lot identifier." "KBSN 441 through 447, Nia said. Yuna stopped typing. 7 containers. 40-foot standard. The declared cargo is agricultural processing equipment, but the thermal signature on the pier side scan at 0530 would have read inconsistently with standard industrial metal mass because military-grade ordnance has a different density distribution. Nia pointed to the manifest. "The Busan customs officer who processed the arrival. Was it Lim Byung-tae?" "No," Yuna said. "It was a different officer. Name of Park Jun-sik." Nia had already found the line in the copied page she'd photographed from the tablet. She held it up. "He transferred from the Incheon Customs Division 6 weeks ago. Standard rotation, nothing unusual." She paused. "But his reassignment was requested by the district office, not by Busan Port Authority's normal scheduling process. Someone requested the rotation." Yuna was fully looking at her now. Dojin said nothing. He had his arms crossed and he was watching Nia the way. She was beginning to understand. He had been watching her for 2 years, with the focused and slightly helpless attention of someone observing something they cannot entirely explain to themselves. "I need access to the Customs Division transfer records for the last 3 months, Nia said to Yuna. "And the Nara Shipping Solutions account transaction log from inception." Yuna looked at Dojin. He nodded once. Yuna sat back down and started typing. It took 11 minutes. In those 11 minutes, 3 things happened in other parts of the building that Nia did not know about yet. The first, Chaewon located Seo Min-jae in the parking structure, attempting to access a vehicle registered to a Haesung subsidiary, not his own vehicle, not a rental, but a company car that had been requisitioned that morning under a facilities request signed by Han Soo-chang. Chaewon did not stop him immediately. He followed him to the east exit, and then he made a phone call. The second, Choi found Han Soo-chang in the facilities management office on the 2nd floor, sitting at his desk, eating the lunch he brought from home every day in a blue insulated bag, apparently entirely calm. When Choi walked in, Han looked up. Then Han reached into his desk drawer with the particular movement of someone who has rehearsed it, and Choi crossed the room in 2 seconds flat and put Han's hand on the desk before the drawer was halfway open. Han Soo-chang did not struggle. He looked at Choi's hand on his wrist and he said, in a voice that was almost meditative, "It was only a matter of time." The third, the Kong Syndicate's financial network, the one that ran beneath Haesung International, like roots beneath a building, invisible and load-bearing, registered an anomaly. Not the interrupted transfer. Something else. A secondary access attempt, smaller, quieter, hitting a different node. The kind of probe that was designed to go unnoticed because it was not trying to take anything, it was trying to read. Yuna caught it at the 11-minute mark. "Someone's in the secondary network," she said. The flatness of her voice made it worse. "Read-only access. They're not moving anything. They're mapping." Dojin was across the room in 4 steps. Trace it. Already. Her fingers moved. It's bouncing. 4 proxies, maybe 5. Whoever set this up knew our trace parameters. She paused. It originated from inside the building. Dojin said, "Where?" Another pause. Longer. Nia watched Yuna's face and saw the specific expression of someone who has found an answer they didn't want. "Executive floor," Yuna said. "Workstation 7. The room went very still. Nia's workstation. "The malware is still active," Nia said. "We interrupted the transfer, but we didn't kill the installation," Yuna said. "It's running a secondary function. It's been running it for..." She checked the log. 43 minutes. Since Min-jae had his 9 minutes with the floor empty. "He wasn't running the transfer during the alarm," Nia said. The understanding arrived in pieces, and each piece was colder than the last. He used the alarm to activate the secondary function. The transfer was the distraction. She looked at Dojin. "He was never trying to move money," she said. "He was using the transfer attempt to keep your network team focused on the financial layer." She felt the shape of it settling into place with the specific, horrible clarity of a logistics problem whose solution you've been looking at sideways for 20 minutes. While they watched the money, the secondary function was mapping the organizational network. The real one. Not the corporate structure, the other one. Names, locations, hierarchy. Dojin looked at Yuna. "How much did it get?" he said. Yuna's fingers moved. Her face told the answer before her voice did. "The mapping function ran for 41 minutes before I caught it. The network has..." She stopped. "The network has significant depth." "How much did it get?" he said again. "Enough," Yuna said quietly. "Senior-level identities, 3 regional hubs, the Busan peer contacts." A pause. "The outer protection network for the chairman's personal security." The fluorescent lights hummed. Nia understood then, with precise and devastating clarity, what had just happened. Not the weapons, not the money, not even the frame-up of her credentials. Min-jae had come here to take a photograph of the entire organization, and he had taken it. Whatever Dojin did next, whatever happened at Busan port, whatever became of the weapons shipment, whatever legal or operational response the syndicate mounted, the rival organization now had a map. A detailed, accurate 41-minute map of the people and places and structures that had taken years to build and could not be unexposed once seen. Dojin stood very still. Then he turned and walked to the far wall, and he stood there with his back to the room, and he was not the chairman for approximately 15 seconds. He was just a man standing at a wall, absorbing something that could not be unabsorbed. Nobody spoke. Then he turned back around. His face was entirely composed. That was almost worse. "Get me Min-jae," he said to the room. "Jae-won has him in the parking structure. Bring him here." Min-jae did not look afraid when they brought him in. That was the first thing. Nia had expected. She wasn't sure what she'd expected. Calculation, maybe. Controlled performance. The same warm, engineered affect he'd used all morning. Instead, he looked like a man who had arrived where he expected to arrive and was simply waiting to see how the next part went. He was tall. She hadn't registered how tall he was, in the lobby with the pastry cart and his careful smile. He was tall, and he held himself with a stillness that felt deliberate, like someone who had trained himself not to fill space with nervous energy because nervous energy gave information away. He looked at Nia first. Not at Dojin, not at Jae-won, who was standing at the door, not at Yuna, who had not stopped working at her station. At Nia. "You figured it out faster than the brief suggested," he said. "No performance in it. Almost like a professional acknowledgement." "Sit down," Dojin said. Min-jae sat. Dojin remained standing. He didn't pace. Pacing was information. He simply stood on the other side of the table and looked at Min-jae with the expression Nia now recognized as his most dangerous register. Not anger, not contempt, but the absolute cold of someone who has moved past emotion into calculation. "The mapping function," Dojin said. "Already transmitted," Min-jae said. 40 minutes ago." Nia looked at Yuna. Yuna gave a single small nod. Confirmed. Dojin said, "To whom?" "You know who." "I want you to say it." Min-jae looked at him. A pause. Not hesitation, but the particular pause of someone deciding how much to spend. "The Seo family. My family." He said it without particular pride or shame. They've been building toward this for 4 years. Haesung was the last piece. And the weapons? Already purchased. The transfer was symbolic, a way to attach your financial network to the import chain. The weapons were purchased through 3 other accounts across 2 months. Haesung's involvement was documentation only. He looked at the table. The import exists. The weapons are at your terminal. Your name is on the purchase chain. He looked back up. Whether or not you take me out of this building tonight, that doesn't change. The room was very quiet. The map your malware transmitted, Dojin said. What does your family plan to do with it? Min-jae said nothing. Min-jae. What do you think? Min-jae said. Not cruel, just exact. Nia understood what he meant. The map had names, senior-level identities, regional hub locations, the outer protection network for Dojin's personal security. If the CO family had that information and chose to use it, they didn't need a war. They needed a series of very precise actions, taken quickly, before the Kong organization could change its structure in response. They needed, in other words, to move before Dojin could rebuild around the exposure. How long would that take? She looked at the monitors, at the Busan port schematic on the wall with the Terminal 7 marker, at the manifest folder on the table. How long? She said. Both men looked at her. She was looking at Min-jae. How long before your family moves on the information? She said. You transmitted it 40 minutes ago. What's the operational timeline? Min-jae looked at her with that same professional regard, the look of someone encountering an unexpected variable. You're the secretary, he said. Answer the question. Something shifted in his expression, not softening, sharpening, like he was revising an assessment in real time. 72 hours. Possibly less if they move the weapons first. He paused. The weapons established the legal exposure. Once the import is connected to Haesung's name in the customs system, the police have a basis to investigate. The investigation creates chaos. The SEO family moves against the exposed contacts during the chaos. He looked at Dojin. You built something very clean for 20 years. It only takes one real look to find every weakness. Dojin said, and she was the look. Min-jae turned back to Nia. She was the access, the cleanest access point in the building because she touched every system and nobody watched her do it. Because everyone assumed she was... He paused, choosing the word peripheral. Nia held his gaze. Her hands were flat on the table and she was not shaking because she had finished shaking in the elevator and now she was on the other side of it, in the specific place that exists past fear where everything becomes very clear and very cold. You chose me because nobody was watching me, she said. Yes. You put your arm around the one person in this building nobody thought to protect. Min-jae didn't answer. Did you know, she said, that he was watching? A pause. Something moved in Min-jae's eyes, the first genuinely uncontrolled thing she'd seen there. We knew the chairman had personal interest in the account. We didn't know the extent. She nodded slowly. So I was peripheral to you and central to him and neither of you told me. Min-jae said nothing. She looked at Dojin. Dojin held her gaze and did not look away and did not offer anything that resembled an excuse because there wasn't one and he knew it, and apparently had decided that the only response available was to simply absorb it. She looked back at the manifest folder. 72 hours. Possibly less. The weapons were at Terminal 7, Pier North, KBSN 441 through 447, 7 40-foot containers with a thermal signature inconsistent with agricultural processing equipment. The purchase chain connecting those containers to Haesung International's financial network was documented in the customs system. Every hour it sat there, it calcified, became more officially real, harder to dispute. She thought about what it would take to break that chain. She thought about customs transfer records, about Park Jun-sik's reassignment request, filed 6 weeks ago by the district office, about the specific language of a reassignment request, which she had read hundreds of times because reassignment sometimes affected the delivery scheduling for executive floor freight, and the language of a forged request would differ from a genuine one in ways that were very small and very specific and that most people would not think to look for. She thought about the fact that she had looked at everything for 2 years that nobody else looked at. She opened the manifest folder. I need the district office's filing records for the last 8 weeks, she said to Yuna. And I need the original formatting template for a Port Authority transfer request. The version before the system update in November, because that's when they changed the header field, and anyone who prepared this document before November would have used the old format. Yuna was already typing. Dojin looked at Nia. He said quietly, "What are you doing?" "If the reassignment request for Park Jun-sik was forged," she said, "it's not a financial crime. It's an administrative fraud in a government document. That's a different jurisdiction, a different evidentiary standard, and it breaks the chain of custody for every customs approval he signed." She turned a page in the manifest. "If his approvals are void, the import documentation is void. If the import documentation is void, the connection to Haesung's purchase chain is procedurally compromised." She looked up. "It doesn't erase the weapons from the terminal, but it gives you grounds to contest the documentation before the police investigation has a basis to proceed." The room was quiet. Minji was looking at her with an expression she couldn't entirely read. It wasn't the professional regard from before. It was something that sat closer to the surface. "You can't build a legal case in 72 hours, he said. Not a taunt, an observation. "I'm not building a legal case," she said. "I'm looking for the one wrong word in a forged document that someone prepared 6 weeks ago under time pressure." She looked at him directly. "How careful were they?" Minjae said nothing. "If they were careful," she said, "I won't find it. But careful people don't use an outdated form template because careful people update their reference documents." She looked at Yuna's screen. "So how careful were they?" Silence. "Minjae," Dojin said. Minjae looked at the table. Then he said, "The request was prepared in 4 hours. We had a window when the district duty officer was unreachable and the deputy had signature authority. The deputy was—" He stopped. "Was what?" Nia said. "Was ours." He said it without inflection. The deputy signed it. He used whatever form was in the system. Nia looked at Yuna. "November update." Yuna pulled the template, pulled the filed request, put them side by side on one monitor. The room held its breath. Yuna pointed at the screen. A single header field, Port Authority document classification, formatted in the pre-November style, 2-line entry where the updated template used 3. One wrong line in a forged document prepared in 4 hours by someone who didn't know the template had changed. It was, Nia thought, the smallest possible thread. She pulled it anyway. "Print that," she said, "with timestamps. And I need the name of whoever at Customs has jurisdiction to suspend a document pending administrative review." She was already pulling the next page of the manifest, looking for the signature chain, the approval dates, the specific procedural sequence that would have to be contested in the right order. She could feel Dojin behind her, not moving, not speaking, and she understood, with a certainty that lived somewhere below thought, that this was the moment he had been watching her toward for 2 years without knowing it. Not the crisis, not the danger. But this specific thing, the way she looked at a problem that everyone else had looked at and missed, and found the one line that didn't belong. She wasn't invisible anymore. She didn't know yet what that was going to cost her. But the printer across the room began to run, and Yuna was pulling the Customs jurisdiction directory, and 72 hours was 72 hours, and the weapons were at Terminal 7, and the thread was in her hand. And somewhere in the building below them, Han Su-chang was sitting in a room with Choi's hand on his wrist. And whatever Han knew, whatever 9 years of operational loyalty had put inside that calm, unremarkable man, was about to come out. And in the parking structure an hour ago, before Jaewon brought Minjae upstairs, Minjae had made a phone call. Nia didn't know about the phone call yet. She would, because the voice on the other end of that call had said 4 words that none of the monitors in this room had intercepted. And those 4 words were not about the weapons or the money or the map. They were about her. Specifically, they were about the fact that the secretary had been inside the chairman's office for 3 hours and the chairman had locked the door. And the CO family now had a piece of information that was potentially more valuable than 14 billion won, or a network map, or a weapons shipment. They had the shape of what Kong Dojin would burn everything down to protect, and they intended to take it. The printer finished at 11:47 a.m. Nia pulled the pages before they'd cooled. 3 sheets. The forged transfer request on the left, the official November template on the right, and the jurisdictional contact sheet Yuna had pulled from the Customs Authority directory. A deputy inspector named Oh Sang-wook, Busan District, reachable by direct line for administrative holds on pending documentation. She was reaching for the desk phone when Dojin's hand came down on her wrist. Not the way Min-jae had done it this morning. Nothing like that. Just his hand covering hers, stopping the motion. His palm was warm, and his grip was light. And when she looked up at him, his face was doing the thing it had been doing since she'd walked into his office at 7:45, the thing she still didn't have a word for. "Not from here," he said. She looked at the phone, then at him. Why? Because if the Seo family has already flagged this building's outgoing lines and given 41 minutes of network access, they may have. Then a call from a Haesung number to the Busan Customs Authority is the thing that tells them we've found the document flaw. He released her wrist. We get one window to use that information. We don't spend it on a phone call they can intercept. Then how? Sungil has a clean line, personal mobile, never registered to the company. He looked at Yuna. Get him down here. Yuna reached for her own phone. Nia looked at the 3 printed pages and thought about 72 hours, which was now 70 hours and change, and about 7 40-foot containers sitting at a pier in Busan under documentation that had one wrong line in one header field, and about how small that thread was and how much was hanging from it. Then she thought about the phone call Min-jae had made in the parking structure before Jaewon brought him upstairs. She didn't know about that call yet, but something in the back of her mind, the same part that had looked at the February manifest at 6:30 and known without knowing that the weight variance was deliberate, was pulling at her. A loose thread she couldn't name yet, the feeling of a number that doesn't add up. Min-jae had been calm when they brought him in, too calm, and not in the way of a man who had accepted defeat, in the way of a man who had completed the part of the plan that mattered, the mapping function. The data transmitted 40 minutes before they caught him. But the mapping function had been the distraction. He'd said so himself. The transfer was symbolic, a way to attach Haesung's financial network to the weapons import documentation. And she had believed him because it was consistent with everything the manifest showed, and because the logic of it was tight. She believed him still. But he'd had 9 minutes with the floor empty during the fire alarm. The malware had run a secondary function for 41 minutes, and he had been calm. She looked up from the printed pages. "Where's Han Soo-chang?" Dojin looked at her. "Second floor, with Choi." "I need to talk to him." "Nia?" "Not about the network map." She picked up the pages. "About the alarm. About who knew the floor layout well enough to know that a third-floor east wing trigger would pull every person off the executive level without triggering the building lockdown protocol." She looked at him. "That's operational knowledge. That's not something Min-jae walked in with from Singapore. Someone here told him." Dojin was quiet for 2 seconds. Then, "Jaewon, bring her." Chit. Han Soo-chang looked like someone's grandfather. That was the thing Nia kept coming back to as she stood in the second-floor facilities office and looked at the man sitting across the small table with his hands folded on the surface and his lunch bag on the corner of the desk, still sealed, untouched. He had a round face and reading glasses pushed up on his forehead and the particular posture of a man who had spent decades sitting at desks doing work. Nobody celebrated. She recognized it. She recognized it very specifically. Choi was standing at the door. Dojin was standing behind Nia's left shoulder. The room was small, and the fluorescent light in here was the same as the 14th floor, but felt worse somehow, more institutional, more final. Han Soo-chang looked at Nia, not at Dojin, at her. "You're the one who found the form template," he said. "Yes." He nodded slowly, like he'd expected it. "I told them to update the reference document. I told them twice." He said it without bitterness. Just fact, the way people stated facts about things that had already happened and could no longer be changed. Nobody listened. "Who told you about the alarm trigger point?" she said. A pause. He unfolded his hands and refolded them. "I told them about the alarm trigger point." "Why?" He looked at his lunch bag. "Because they asked me to." "For how long?" Dojin said from behind her. His voice was very controlled. Han's eyes moved to Dojin. Something passed between them that Nia couldn't fully read. Not guilt, exactly, but the specific weariness of a man who had been carrying a weight for a long time and had just set it down and was discovering that his arms didn't know what to do without it. 8 months, Han said. "They approached me 8 months ago." He looked back at his lunch bag. "My daughter, she had a situation, a debt, not hers originally, but it became hers." He stopped. "It's not an excuse. I know, Dojin said. I provided building access schedules, maintenance windows, keycard rotation protocols. He said it like he was reading a list of charges. I didn't know about the weapons. I want you to know that. I didn't know what they were building. But you knew it wasn't good, Nia said. He looked at her. Yes. And you kept going. He was quiet. Your daughter, Nia said. Where is she? Han looked up sharply. The grandfather face broke just at the edges, showing something raw underneath. She's in Dojin. She doesn't know anything about this. Nia looked at Dojin. Dojin said to Choi, get the name, make sure she's protected. Then to Han, if you tell me everything, I mean everything, starting from the first contact 8 months ago. Every name, every request, every document you passed. Then your daughter's situation disappears. The debt disappears. A pause. But I need everything, starting now. Han Soo-chung looked at his folded hands for a long time. Then he started talking. He talked for 22 minutes. By the end of it, the room had a different shape. Not the room, the situation. The understanding of the situation had changed its shape completely. The way a building looks different once you know where the load-bearing walls are. Nia stood outside the door with Dojin while Choi stayed inside with Han and a recorder, and she went through what they'd learned in her head the way she went through manifests, stripping it to its load-bearing components. The CO family had been building this approach for 8 months. Not from the outside. From the inside using Han, using the building's own architecture against itself. They had known about Nara shipping solutions not because they'd hacked Haesung's corporate system, but because Han had given them the subsidiary's filing structure in month 3. They had chosen Nia not randomly, but deliberately. Han had told them, in month 5, that the executive floor secretary had access to every system that mattered, and nobody managed her authorization review. They had designed this around her specifically, and the phone call Min-jae had made in the parking structure. Han had received a message this morning. Not a call. A message, automated, a trigger signal that meant the operational timeline had changed. That meant whatever the SEO family planned to do with the map they'd extracted, they had moved the execution window forward. Not 72 hours. Han thought the word he'd received was tonight. Dojin had gone very still when Han said that. He was still very still now, standing in the corridor outside the facilities office with his jacket open and his phone in his hand, and Nia was looking at the side of his face and reading the calculation running behind it. They're going to move against the exposed contacts, she said. Tonight, before I can restructure, he said. Yes. He looked at his phone. I have 43 people whose operational security has been compromised by the map. 43 people who are currently going about their day without knowing that. He didn't say it with drama. He said it the way you say a number when the number is the whole problem. Nia thought about 43 people. She thought about the Busan terminal and the 7 containers and the weapons that were there right now, at this moment, sitting at the pier under a customs hold that didn't exist yet, because the call to Oh Sang-wook hadn't been made yet. 2 problems. Same clock. You can't do both, she said. No. If you move people to protect the 43 contacts, you don't have the operational capacity to go to Busan tonight and secure the weapons before they move. No. And if you go to Busan, your people are exposed until you come back. Yes. She looked at the phone in his hand. Who decides? He looked at her. I decide. I know you decide. I'm asking what you decide. A pause. The corridor was empty except for them. Somewhere above them, Min-jae was in the 14th floor room with Jae-won, and Yuna was still running traces, and Sung-il was on his way down with a clean phone line. The contacts can relocate, Dojin said. If I reach them in the next hour, most of them can move before tonight. It's not ideal. It burns covers that took years to build, but they can move. He looked at his phone. The weapons can't relocate. Once the CO family moves them out of the terminal, they disappear into a distribution chain. The documentation connecting them to Haesung's name stays, but the physical evidence that they're military-grade ordnance, the actual weapons, the containers, that's gone. He looked up. And once the police have the documentation without the physical evidence to contest it, there's no administrative appeal that saves the company. Then you go to Busan, Nia said. Then I go to Busan, he said, and I need every contact notified and relocated in the next 90 minutes by the 3 people in this building I trust completely. Sung-il, Chaewon, Choi. She paused. That leaves you short for Busan. Yes. He looked at her. I'm taking 12. It's not enough, but it's what I have. She looked at him for a moment. At the phone. At the precise controlled economy of a man who was making a calculation that had blood in it and was making it anyway because the alternative was worse. She thought about the phone call. Tonight. Min Jae, she said. He made a call before Chaewon brought him up. Dojin's eyes sharpened. Han's trigger message wasn't the call. The call was something else, something specific. She tried to find the shape of it. He looked at me before he looked at you when they brought him in. And in the parking structure, he had 4 minutes between when the alarm reset and when Chaewon reached him. That's long enough for one call. Dojin said, "What are you thinking?" She was thinking about the shape of Min Jae's calm, the professional regard, the way he'd looked at her and said, "You're the one he'd burn everything down to protect." He hadn't said that. That was what his eyes had said, when she'd held his gaze across the table and asked how careful they were, and he'd answered. He'd known. The Seo family knew. The call wasn't about the weapons, she said. The call was about me. Dojin went very still. If they know you'd prioritize protecting me over operational response, then they know how to split your attention. She looked at him directly. And if they're moving tonight, one of those moves is going to be toward wherever you put me. The corridor was silent. Dojin looked at her for a long time. Then he turned and walked back into the facilities office and said, to nobody in particular, "Change of plan." Sungil arrived with the clean phone at 12:34 p.m. The call to Oh Sang-wook at the Busan Customs Authority took 9 minutes. Nia did the talking. Dojin's decision, not because he deferred to her, but because the call required someone who could discuss the specific administrative irregularity in the form template without triggering the formal language protocols that a legal or corporate representative would trigger. Oh Sang-wook was a bureaucrat. Bureaucrats responded to other bureaucrats. Nia spoke the language fluently. She explained the discrepancy in the header field. She cited the document classification identifier, the pre-November format, the signature sequence on the transfer request. She did not explain why she knew these things or who she was working for. She cited the public filing record and the template archive and the date of the system update, and she gave Oh Sang-wook exactly the information he needed to initiate an administrative review without making it sound like anything other than a routine document verification request. Oh Sang-wook asked for a fax number to send the confirmation. Nia gave him Sung-il's personal fax line, Sung-il, who had a machine in his apartment because Dojin operated in a world where sometimes you needed to receive a document at 2 in the morning without a corporate address attached to it. Oh Sang-wook said the administrative hold would be initiated within the hour. Pending review, the container lot would be flagged and held at the terminal. Nia thanked him and ended the call. She sat for a moment with the phone in her hand. The hold wouldn't last indefinitely. Oh Sang-wook would request supporting documentation within 24 hours, and the supporting documentation would need to be substantial enough to survive a formal challenge from whoever the SEO family had in the district office. But it bought time. It bought Dojin time to reach the terminal before the weapons moved. She set the phone down. "It's done," she said. Dojin looked at her, then at Sung-il. "How long to Busan?" 3.5 hours by road. Faster if we take... "We take the road," Dojin said. "No flight records." He looked at Chaewon. "I want the vehicles in the basement ready in 20 minutes. Tell the team no lights, no sirens, no markings. We're cargo transport." He looked at Choi. "The contact list? Start from the top, work down. Anyone you can't reach in 90 minutes, flag for relocation regardless of whether they confirm." He turned to Nia last. She already knew what he was going to say. She could see it in the way he was standing, closer than he needed to be, that same specific weight of someone who was about to say a thing they had been holding for a long time. "No," she said. "Nia, I'm not staying here. I'm not asking you to stay here." He reached into his jacket and produced a card. Matte black, no name, just a number. "There's a building in Mapo-gu, 12 floors. The entire 6th floor is a secured residence. It's not registered to me, not to Haesung, not to any entity you'd find in a standard corporate search. Sungil will take you there. He stays with you. And if the Seo family already knows about it, they don't. You don't know that. I know what's in the map they extracted. The sixth floor in Mapo isn't in any document that runs through this building's network. It's not in any document at all. He held her eyes. It's mine. Not the company's. Mine. She looked at the card. She thought about the apartment building in Mapogu, where she'd lived for 18 months. The security camera he'd had fixed 4 days after she moved in. The things he'd built around her that she hadn't known existed. If something goes wrong in Busan, she said, I'll call Sungil's line. If something goes wrong and you can't call? He was quiet for a moment. Then, Yuna has operational continuity instructions. She knows what to do if I don't come back. Nia looked at him. That's not what I asked. He looked back at her. Something moved across his face. Not the chairman's face, not the controlled face, the one underneath. The one she'd seen for the first time this morning when he'd said, I couldn't stop. I know it's not what you asked, he said quietly. I don't have a better answer. She folded the card. She put it in her cardigan pocket. 12 people isn't enough for Terminal 7, she said. How many does the Seo family have on the ground in Busan? We think 15, possibly 20. 12 against 20 in a working pier at night with active cargo equipment and limited light. I know the numbers. Then take more. I don't have more that I can pull without leaving the contact protection completely unsupported. His jaw was set. 12 is what I have. 12 is enough. She looked at him and understood that 12 is enough was not a tactical assessment. It was the thing a person said when the numbers were bad, and the alternative was to say the numbers out loud to someone who was going to worry about them. She stepped forward. She wasn't sure afterward exactly what she intended. The cardigan. The card folded in her pocket. The space between them that had been exactly the same distance for 2 years, even when he was 40 feet away through glass. Some specific gravity she had been navigating without knowing she was navigating it. She put her hand on his arm, briefly, just above the elbow, through the fabric of his jacket. She could feel the tension in it, the specific coiled tension of a body preparing for something physical and dangerous. Come back, she said. He looked at her hand, then at her face. Yes. She stepped back. 20 minutes, she said. I'll be ready. The convoy left the Haesung building at 1:12 p.m. 3 vehicles, dark, unmarked. Dojin in the second one with 8 men, Chaewon and 4 more in the third. The first was a decoy, empty, running 2 minutes ahead, taking the same route. Nia stood in the parking structure and watched them go. Then Sungil touched her elbow, and she followed him toward the elevator. What? The drive to Mapo took 18 minutes. Sungil didn't talk. Nia didn't either. She sat in the back of the car with the printed pages on her lap. The 3 sheets from the customs documentation, which she'd folded and taken without thinking about it. And she looked at them without seeing them. She thought about 43 contacts being moved across the country in 90 minutes. She thought about Choi's voice on a clean phone line, the same neutral, administrative voice she'd spent 2 years hearing on the executive floor, delivering a very different kind of news. She thought about Min-jae sitting in the 14th floor room. She pulled out her own phone, not the clean line, her personal phone, the one registered in her name and tracked by everyone who needed to track it. And she looked at it. Then she put it back in her pocket. The building in Mapo was exactly what Dojin had said. 12 floors, nothing remarkable, the kind of building that existed in the middle of the city as a fact rather than a presence. Sung-il keyed them through a lobby that was clean but not decorated, an elevator that opened onto a 6th floor that was, in contrast, completely different, not luxurious exactly, but serious, the kind of space that had been designed to function for extended periods. Full kitchen, 2 separate workstations, monitors already running, a window that overlooked the Han and was set with reflective glass you couldn't see through from outside. Sungil locked the elevator. Nia set her printed pages on the workstation desk and looked at the monitors. One of them was running a feed from a traffic camera that showed, she realized after a moment, the entrance to the Busan Expressway. Another showed the Harbor Authority's public pier monitoring channel, the one the Port Authority used for cargo tracking, a live grid of terminal locations and container statuses. Terminal 7 was on the grid. Container lot KBSN 441 through 447 showed a status flag she hadn't seen on the grid before. Small, orange, 3 letters, ADM, administrative hold. Oh Sang-wook had moved faster than she'd expected. She let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. Then she sat down and looked at the second monitor and began to work. The Busan Expressway hit rain at the 2-hour mark. Dojin watched it come through the windshield. Not steady rain, the coastal kind, sideways and abrupt. The sort that made the roads slick and the distances unpredictable. The driver didn't slow down. He'd chosen this driver specifically because the driver never slowed down for weather. His phone had been quiet for 90 minutes. That was Choi's signal. No news was the contacts moving. Every call would be a problem. The phone rang at 3:18 p.m. It was Yuna. The CO family has people in Busan ahead of you, she said. We're reading communications traffic on their operations channel. They moved the timetable again. They're not waiting for dark. Dojin looked at the rain. How far ahead? They left Seoul at noon. They've had a 90-minute lead. A pause. Chairman, they have the terminal layout. Han's files included the pier maintenance schedule, which means they know when the cargo equipment changes shift. When's the next shift change? 4:15. Dojin checked the time. 3:19. We're 40 minutes out. The shift change leaves a 12-minute window where the pier perimeter monitoring goes to minimal staffing. Skeleton crew. Yuna's voice was flat and precise. That's when they'll move. 40 minutes. 12-minute window starting at 4:15. He was 6 minutes short. He looked at the driver. Faster. The driver looked at the rain. Faster, Dojin said. The car accelerated. Nia was looking at the pier monitoring grid at 3:31 when the status flag on KBSN 441 through 447 changed. ADM dropped out. The containers were showing active movement status, a signal that meant the cargo handling system had registered equipment contact with the container lot. Someone at the terminal had initiated physical handling. The administrative hold should have prevented that. She leaned forward. The status refreshed every 90 seconds. The next refresh showed the containers still in movement status, now flagged with a secondary code she'd never seen on the grid before. She pulled the grid's legend from the Harbor Authority's public documentation site. Sung-il had the site open on the adjacent monitor and found the code. Emergency override, authorized by Port Authority duty officer. She looked at Sung-il. They have someone in the Port Authority duty office. Sung-il was already on his phone. Not the clean line, she said. He switched phones. She looked at the grid. The containers were moving. Not off the pier, not yet, but moving within the terminal, which meant they were being repositioned, which meant someone at the terminal was preparing to load them onto something. She pulled up the Harbor Authority's vessel tracking system, another public system, another live feed, and looked at what was docked at Terminal 7 North Pier. One vessel. A medium tonnage cargo ship, registered flag, Panama. Departure logged as 5:20 p.m. Destination, international waters, no declared port of call. 5:20 p.m. Dojin was 40 minutes out at 3:19. He was probably 35 minutes out now. The window opened at 4:15 and he was going to arrive into a situation where the weapons were already being loaded onto a ship that left at 5. She picked up the clean phone. Dojin answered on the first ring. The hold was overridden, she said. They have someone in the duty office. The containers are already in active movement status. There's a vessel at the North Pier, Panama flag, 5 o'clock departure. She read him the vessel registration number. They're loading now. Silence. Rain on asphalt, audible even through the line. How much time? He said. If loading started in the last 10 minutes and it's 7 40-foot containers with standard pier equipment. She did the calculation in her head. The same way she calculated freight logistics every day, the timing of cargo operations as natural to her as breathing. 45 minutes minimum. More likely an hour with the shift transition disruption. She paused. You can still make it. The perimeter. Skeleton crew from 4:15, but they started early. They didn't wait for the window. She paused. Which means whoever they have managing the pier security already cleared the perimeter. Dojin, the pier is probably already theirs. More silence. Then his voice, completely level. How many entry points does a North Pier terminal have? She pulled the Harbor Authority's public layout documentation. She had looked at pier terminal layouts approximately once in her career, in the context of a freight scheduling query, and she had looked at them the way she looked at everything, completely, retaining the structure without knowing she was retaining it. 3 primary vehicle entries, 2 pedestrian gates, 1 waterside access point off the pier edge. She scanned the layout. The vehicle entries are all on the south side of the terminal. If they've cleared the perimeter, that's where their people are. Waterside access. It's a service ladder on the pier face. It's designed for maintenance access from boats. It's not monitored by standard security. It's on the maintenance schedule, which Han gave them. A pause. Which means they probably haven't stationed anyone there because they don't think anyone knows about it. But you know about it, he said. I know about it, she said. A pause. She could hear his breathing through the line and rain and the engine of the car running hard. Sung-il, Dojin said. Sir, get her somewhere without a window. I'm fine, she started. Nia. His voice was exactly the same as when he'd said please in the chairman's office this morning, with the Han River flat and gray outside. Low, human, not a command. Please, she looked at the monitors, at the pier grid, at the vessel registration number on the Harbor Authority's tracking system. Come back, she said. A pause. Yes, he said. He ended the call. The convoy hit the Busan harbor perimeter at 4:08 p.m. Dojin was out of the vehicle before it fully stopped. The rain had gotten worse, the kind of rain that came off the ocean carrying weight, not falling so much as pressing, a horizontal force that hit the side of the face and pushed. The harbor smelled like diesel and salt and the specific industrial cold of a working port. He could see Terminal 7's overhead lights from 300 meters. 4 cranes, active. Loading equipment moving. The silhouette of the Panama flag vessel at the pier edge, its loading dock extended. Chaewon came up beside him. South entries are manned. I count 2 at the main gate, minimum. Can't see the east gate from here. He was speaking low and fast. If we push the vehicle entry, we announce ourselves 30 seconds before we're inside the perimeter. They'll abort the load, and we end up with a standoff on the pier. Waterside, Dojin said. Jaewon looked at him. Sir, the ladder access is 40 meters of open pier face before you reach the container staging area. I know. In this rain? I know, Dojin said. He looked at the 12 men behind him. He did the specific arithmetic that he'd been doing since Nia said 12 against possibly 20, and he'd said 12 is enough. He separated it. 6 to take the waterside approach with him, 6 to create a vehicle entry diversion at the south gate. Not an assault, a presence. Lights on, engines loud, the kind of visible approach that pulled attention to the south while the other team reached the pier face. He laid it out in 45 seconds. The team listened the way his team always listened. Completely, without questions, because questions had been asked and answered in training, and what remained here was execution. The containers don't leave the pier, he said. That's the objective, nothing else. Chaewon nodded. They split. The pier face was everything Jaewon had said. 40 meters of exposed concrete running along the water's edge, slick with rain, the wind coming off the harbor in gusts that hit like a flat hand. The service ladder was exactly where the maintenance layout had said it was. A steel construction, painted orange once, mostly rust now, bolted to the pier face below the main deck level. Dojin went up first, his hands on the wet steel, his feet finding the rungs by pressure rather than vision, the wind trying to pull him backward, and the salt water 15 feet below him doing exactly nothing for the mathematics of the climb. He got to the top and pressed himself flat against the pier edge and looked. The staging area was lit by the crane lights, harsh, industrial, casting multiple shadows that moved with the equipment. He counted 4 men working the loading equipment, operating the crane controls, and the container positioning systems. 3 men standing back, not working. Watching. One of those 3 was talking on a phone, and then, between 2 container stacks at the far end of the staging area, he saw a figure he recognized. Not Min-jae. Min-jae was still in Seoul in the 14th floor room with Jaewon's team watching the door. This was someone older, broader. The specific physical presence of someone who operated at a level where other people absorbed the physical risk, and who came to the field only when the stakes were personal. Dojin had seen this man once before, at a distance, 3 years ago, at a neutral location during a negotiation that had not ended neutrally. He had a face that had been rearranged by time and intention into something beyond expression, Not blank, but finished, like a thing that had been worked on until the working was complete. Seo Byung-kwan, the Seo family's operational head, the man who had designed this. He had come himself. Dojin looked at the three standing figures, looked at the four equipment operators, looked at the vessel loading dock and the first container already half-positioned on the ship's deck, the crane holding it steady against the rain and the wind while the deck crew signaled adjustments. Then the south gate exploded with light and engine noise. His 6 men at the vehicle entry had gone in loud. Headlights, engine revs, the specific sonic signature of vehicles that were not trying to be invisible. The three standing figures all turned south. The equipment operators looked up. Dojin went over the pier edge. What happened in the next 4 minutes was not clean. It was not the kind of action that resolved with precision and economy. It was rain and concrete and the specific chaos of a pier at night, with equipment still running and men who were prepared for a confrontation and men who were very ready to provide one. Dojin took the first man from behind, fast and hard. His ribs hit the concrete and the sound he made was the sound of impact rather than pain, because pain came after. The second man turned and Dojin hit him in the throat. Not because it was the most efficient target, but because it was available, and the rain was making the footing treacherous, and efficiency was a secondary concern after effectiveness. His team was over the pier edge behind him. 6 men moving through the staging area, using the container stacks for cover, pushing toward the loading dock. The crane operator killed the power on the suspended container, which meant the first container swung free, unsecured, 40 feet of steel box hanging from a cable in 30-knot harbor wind, and the deck crew on the vessel scattered, and the loading operation went from controlled to immediately not controlled. Dojin heard shouting, multiple voices, Korean and something else, directions and counters in the chaos. He was moving through it, toward the far end of the staging area, toward the gap between the container stacks where Seo Byung-kwan had been standing. The gap was empty. He swept left, past the container stack, and found him. Seo Byung-kwan was not running. He was standing with 2 men behind him, looking at Dojin the way people looked at things they had prepared for and found, upon arrival, to be approximately as expected. "Kong," he said. Dojin said nothing. I was breathing hard, rain running into his eyes. His left hand was bleeding from where it had caught a piece of equipment on the way through the staging area. Not serious, just present, the way blood was present in these situations. "You can stop the load," Seo said. "It doesn't change the documentation. The documentation has an administrative hold, which my duty officer has already resolved. By tomorrow morning, the formal review will show the transfer request was valid." He looked at Dojin with the same finished expression. "I prepared this for 8 months, Kong. You've had 8 hours. "I had her," Dojin said. Seo Byung-kwan's expression shifted by a fraction. "Yes, that was unexpected." He looked at the rain briefly, like a man acknowledging weather. "The secretary, who looks at what everyone else walks past." He looked back. "I understand it now. I didn't before Min-jae went in." "Then you understand why you're not leaving this pier with those containers." "I'm leaving with them because you have 12 men and I have 19. Seo Byung-kwan said it with complete calm. "And because in approximately 4 minutes, the Harbor Authority duty officer is going to formally clear the administrative hold, and you'll be trespassing in a commercial terminal with a weapons cache and your name on the purchase documentation." Dojin looked at the 2 men behind Seo, looked at the suspended container still swinging on its cable, looked at the 6 remaining containers in the staging area, still on the pier, not yet loaded. He looked at his phone. He had 1 call he hadn't made, 1 name he'd held in reserve because using it cost something that couldn't be unspent. A relationship built over 20 years that operated on the principle of mutual non-interference, meaning the moment he called this name into a situation, the situation became shared property and the debt that created would be paid in ways he couldn't fully predict. He looked at Seo Byung-kwan. Seo Byung-kwan looked back, and Dojin made the call. The voice that answered was very old and very quiet and said nothing, just waited. Dojin said 3 words. Then he lowered the phone and looked at Seo Byung-kwan and said, 4 minutes was optimistic. 2 minutes and 40 seconds later, the Harbor Authority's port security channel came alive with a priority alert that had not originated from any standard law enforcement agency. and 6 additional vehicles entered the terminal perimeter from the waterway side, a direction that no one had been watching because no one had expected anyone to come from the water. The loading dock lights cut out. The pier went to emergency backup lighting only, orange and low, the color of the rusted service ladder, the color of wet concrete and harbor dark. In that light, Seo Byung-kwan looked at Dojin across the staging area, with the rain between them and the sound of the harbor, and the suspended container still swinging slowly on its cable like a pendulum counting something. "You'll owe a significant debt," Seo said. "Yes," Dojin said, "to a very old man who will collect in ways you can't anticipate." "Yes," Dojin said again. Seo Byung-kwan looked at him for a long moment. Something moved in his finished face. Not admiration, not defeat, but the particular expression of a man who has encountered a variable he had genuinely failed to model. "The secretary," he said. "Yes," said Dojin, for the third time. Kwan made a small sound that might have been something close to acknowledgement. Then the backup lighting caught the movement of the new arrivals coming through the terminal perimeter, and the 2 men behind Seo stepped forward, and the last 4 minutes of the Busan Harbor confrontation began in the orange light and the driving rain, with 7 containers still on the pier and a Panama flag vessel rocking at the dock, and Kang Dojin's left hand bleeding into the wet concrete of the North Pier floor. The last 4 minutes at Busan North Pier did not resolve cleanly. Nothing about it was clean. The backup lighting turned everything the color of old rust, and in that light men moved and collided, and the sounds were the sounds of a working pier, repurposed for something it was not built for. Boots on wet concrete, steel on steel, the groan of the suspended container still swinging on its cable above the staging area, like something that had given up trying to land. Dojin's team had been 12. The new arrivals from the waterway brought additional numbers, but they came in from an unfamiliar angle, and their coordination with his men was imperfect in the way that all unplanned coordination was imperfect. Gaps, redundancies. 2 men covering the same position, while another position went briefly uncovered. Seo Byung-kwan used one of those gaps. Not to run, to reach the loading dock. Specifically to reach the dock's emergency release panel, which cut the crane cable's tension lock and let the suspended container drop its last 6 feet onto the vessel's deck with a collision that shook the pier, scattered the deck crew, and bought his men on the south perimeter 45 seconds of confusion to reorganize. It was a tactical move. Clean, fast, the decision of someone who had thought through his contingencies far enough to know that creating chaos was more useful than winning a direct confrontation he was no longer positioned to win. Dojin was across the staging area in 10 seconds. He hit the dock ramp at a run, wet boots on wet steel, and his left hand caught the railing and the cut from the equipment earlier reopened, and he kept moving. The deck of the vessel was in motion. The crane drop had destabilized the load on the forward deck, and the container was sitting at an angle across the loading hatch, with 2 of its corner fittings improperly seated, and the ship was rocking with the harbor swell and the rain. Seo Byung-kwan was at the vessel's wheelhouse access door. He had a key. Of course he had a key. He'd had 8 months. Dojin caught him at the door. What happened in the next 90 seconds was not a movie fight. It was 2 middle-aged men in a driving rain on a ship deck that was actively unstable, and it was ugly and effortful, and Seo Byung-kwan was broader and had 50 pounds on Dojin and used them. And Dojin had been in situations with worse odds and knew, the way you learned by surviving and not by thinking, that the only thing that mattered in the next 90 seconds was not winning, but preventing the man from getting through that door. Because if Seo Byung-kwan reached the wheelhouse, the captain, who was either his man or a man he'd paid, would take the vessel out of the slip, and the container improperly seated on the forward deck would shift, and in harbor swell with a load that heavy and improperly balanced, the ship would make it approximately 2 nautical miles before something catastrophic happened, and none of the evidence on that deck would be recoverable from the harbor floor. So Dojin held the door. He held it with his shoulder and his back and his bleeding left hand on the handle, and his feet braced against the deck fitting, and Seo Byung-kwan pushed, and the rain came horizontally, and the ship rocked, and the container above them shifted 3 inches, with a sound like the pier itself groaning, and Dojin held the door. Chaewon came over the gangway at 40 seconds. At 60 seconds, 2 of the waterway arrivals reached the deck. At 90 seconds, Seo Byung-kwan stopped pushing. He stepped back. He was breathing hard. They both were. The specific breath of exertion rather than fear, ragged and deep. His face was wet. His jacket had torn at the shoulder seam. He looked at Dojin with the finished face, and he looked at Jae-won and the two men flanking the gangway, and he made the calculation that Dojin had made an hour ago in the parking structure, the calculation about available resources and probable outcomes. He put his hands down. "The debt you've called in tonight," Seo Byung-kwan said between breaths, "is going to cost you more than you've calculated." "I know," Dojin said. "The documentation is still in the customs system, the weapons import chain. The administrative review will proceed. The forged transfer request will be invalidated." Dojin straightened. The cut on his hand was running freely, and he pressed it against his jacket without looking at it. "The chain breaks without the transfer request." Seo looked at him. Something shifted in the finished face. Not defeat, but the specific expression of someone recalibrating the model they had built and finding a component they'd miscalculated. "You had less than 12 hours. "I had her," Dojin said, for the second time that night. 8 hours was enough. The harbor authorities' lights came on at the pier perimeter. Full power, white, the kind of light that made everything visible and nothing hideable. In that light, Seo Byung-kwan looked older. Not diminished. The specific aging of a man who had spent decades being formidable and who remained formidable even now, even wet and breathing hard on a ship deck in the rain. He looked at the lights, at the perimeter, at Chae-won. "The secretary," he said for the second time. "Don't," Dojin said. Seo Byung-kwan looked at him. "I was going to say—" A pause, something almost like consideration moving across the finished face. "That Min-jae told me she would be unremarkable, that she would be the easiest part." He looked at the rain. He was wrong. He let Chae-won take his arm. He walked off the deck without assistance, without theater, without any of the performance that a lesser man might have offered to salvage something from the moment. Just walked, steady, in the driving rain, down the gangway to the pier where the harbor authorities' people were waiting. Dojin stood on the deck and watched him go. His hand was bleeding. His shoulder ached from where it had hit the door. The rain was doing what harbor rain did, which was refuse to care about any of it. He picked up his phone and called the Mapo building's clean line. Sung-il answered. "It's done," Dojin said. A pause. Then Sung-il said, "She's awake. She's been working." Dojin exhaled. "Tell her—" He stopped. "Sir?" "Tell her I'll be there in 3 hours," he said. "And tell her to eat something. She hasn't eaten since 6:30 this morning." He could hear, faintly through the line, Sung-il relaying this. And then, also faintly, a voice he recognized, slightly unsteady with relief, trying not to show it, covering it with pragmatics the way she covered everything, saying, "Tell him the customs review confirmation came through 40 minutes ago." Oh Sang-wook filed the formal notice. The hold is official. Dojin stood on the deck of a ship in the harbor rain with his bleeding hand pressed to his jacket and his shoulder aching, and 43 people being relocated across the country, and a debt to a very old man that would collect in ways he couldn't predict. And he felt something that he did not immediately have a word for. It took him a moment. The word was relief. He hadn't felt it in a very long time. He got back to Seoul at 2:17 a.m. The rain had followed him up the expressway and arrived at Mapogu at approximately the same time he did, which he did not take as meaningful because he was not a man who took weather as meaningful. He was soaked through by the time he reached the building lobby, and his jacket was ruined and the cut on his left hand had been field-dressed by one of Chae-won's men at the pier with a strip of cloth and the kind of competent indifference that came from having done it before. The elevator opened onto the 6th floor. The lights were on. The monitors were running. The kitchen had been used. He could smell coffee and something else, something warmer. Sung-il was asleep in a chair near the elevator with his phone in his lap, and he woke when the doors opened, came immediately to attention. "She made soup," Sung-il said, slightly bemused by this fact. Dojin looked at him. "From the pantry. She said the pantry was well stocked and she needed something to do with her hands." Sung-il paused. "She also reorganized the filing system on the secondary workstation. She said the indexing structure was illogical." Dojin looked towards the kitchen. "She knows you're here," Sung-il said. "She heard the elevator." Dojin looked at Sung-il for a moment. Go home, he said. Sung-il looked at the elevator, then at the kitchen, then at Dojin. He did the calculation that Sung-il, in 11 years, had learned to do very quickly. Yes, sir, he said, and pressed the elevator button. Dojin walked toward the kitchen. She was at the counter with her back to him. The soup was on the stove, the burner off now, just keeping warm. She was washing a single bowl in the sink, which was the most unnecessary task in the room, given the circumstances, and which she was clearly doing because she had heard the elevator and had decided that the correct response to his arrival was to be already doing something so that neither of them had to perform the moment of seeing each other for the first time since the pier. He stood in the kitchen doorway. She turned off the water, set the bowl in the rack, turned around. She looked at him the way people looked at things they had spent 3 hours being afraid for, which was not the way they normally looked at things. It was more direct than her normal, which was already becoming different from the normal of this morning, the morning of the invisible secretary who apologized before speaking and wore dark colors and practiced taking up less space. She looked at his hand. Sit down, she said. Nia, sit down. You're bleeding through the bandage. She was already opening the cabinet under the sink where the first aid kit was. She had found this, apparently, during the hours she'd spent reorganizing the workstation and making soup. She set it on the counter and looked at him. Sit. He sat at the kitchen table. She brought the first aid kit and sat across from him, and he put his left hand on the table, palm up, and she unwrapped Chaewon's man's field dressing with the careful efficiency of someone who had decided to be useful rather than emotional about it, which he recognized as her specific way of being both. The cut was a 4-centimeter gash across the palm, not deep enough for stitches, but serious enough that the field dressing had soaked through. This needs to be cleaned properly, she said. I know. She cleaned it. She didn't talk while she did it. He watched her hands, the same small, precise hands that had filled a whiteboard with container numbers at 7:30 this morning, and held a phone with the customs authority, and taken a paper bag from a man who had been using her as an instrument without her knowledge. She pressed gauze against the cut and held it, applying pressure with the focused patience of someone who had learned that the only way through certain things was simply to hold on until the bleeding stopped. 43, he said. She looked up. All 43 contacts relocated successfully, 38 before the 8-hour window, 5 in the hour after. All confirmed. He looked at the gauze. Choi covered 20 himself. She looked back at his hand. Good. Han Soo-chung's daughter. Choi got to her before... He stopped. She's safe. She didn't know. I know she didn't know, Nia said. He told me she didn't know. I believed him. You believed him. I know what it looks like when someone is protecting someone they love by doing something that costs them everything else. She said it without emphasis, the way you said things that were simply true and didn't need underlining. She pressed fresh gauze over the cut. He made a bad choice for a real reason. That doesn't make it a good choice. Dojin looked at her. Seo Byung-kwan, she said. In custody. The harbor authority handed him to the appropriate people. The weapons are secured at the terminal under harbor authority control, pending the formal investigation. He paused. The customs documentation will take several weeks to fully unwrap. The forged transfer request invalidates the import chain, but the investigation will be thorough. Haesung's name will require managed disclosure. The company's legal exposure can be contained, not eliminated, contained. The documentation shows the company's credentials were used without authorization. The administrative record of the forged transfer request, combined with the malware installation through a corporate workstation, establishes that this was an external attack rather than internal misconduct. He paused. It's a defensible position. It will be expensive and it will take time, but it's defensible. She taped the gauze. She smoothed the tape at the edges with her thumb, pressing each corner flat. Careful, unnecessary care. The kind of care that was about the hands rather than the injury. The debt you called in, she said. He was quiet. Sung-il told me you made a call, that additional people arrived from the waterway. She looked at him. Who did you call? He looked at his bandaged hand on the table. An old arrangement, 20 years, the kind that operates on mutual non-interference. Which you broke. Which I spent, he said. There's a difference. She held his gaze. What does it cost? I don't know yet. He said it honestly because the alternative was to perform certainty he didn't have, and he was too tired for performance, and she was too precise to be fooled by it. Something significant. The old man will name his terms when he's ready. He looked at the rain on the window. It's possible it costs more than tonight was worth. It's not possible, she said. He looked at her. 7 containers of military-grade ordnance, Haisung's name on the purchase chain, and the CO family with a network map that would have let them dismantle your entire operation from the inside. She looked at him with the same directness she'd used in the chairman's office this morning, the same voice she'd used when she'd said, "I need a whiteboard." That's not a question of worth. That's survival arithmetic. You know the difference. He looked at her for a long time. Yes, he said. Then stop performing doubt about whether you made the right call. She stood up and went to the stove and ladled soup into the bowl she'd washed and set it in front of him. Eat. You haven't eaten either. He looked at the soup, then at her. Sit down, he said. With me. She looked at the counter, at the stove, at the middle distance where she'd been looking all night when she was processing something she hadn't finished processing yet. Then she took a bowl from the cabinet and sat across from him, and they ate soup in a kitchen in Mapogu at 2:30 in the morning while the rain came down on Seoul, and neither of them spoke for a while, and the silence was the kind that didn't need filling. Minji was transferred to formal custody at 6:12 a.m. Dojin handled the arrangement through the appropriate channels, the ones that existed in the space between Haisung International's legal structure and the other structure, the one that didn't appear in any annual report. The charges were specific and documented: industrial espionage, malware installation, identity fraud, conspiracy to import prohibited materials. The digital forensics team had been working through the night on the malware's code architecture, and what they found established beyond contestable doubt that the installation was intentional, sophisticated, and traceable to a specific origin. Minjae was processed with the same professional composure he'd displayed throughout. He did not speak during processing. He accepted the documentation of charges with the look of a man reviewing a contract he'd expected and found approximately accurate. Before they took him out, he looked at Nia. She was standing near the door of the 14th floor room, not because she'd been asked to be there, but because she'd been in the building since 6 a.m. Dojin had brought her back at 4, at her insistence, because the customs documentation review required her to be available to verify the administrative record, and she was not, she'd told him with the specific flatness that ended arguments, going to do that from Mapogu. Minjae looked at her. You should have been peripheral, he said. I know, she said. For the record, he said, the brief described you as a soft target, background personnel, unremarkable access vehicle. He said it without cruelty, almost without inflection. I want you to know that's what you were supposed to be. She looked at him steadily. I know what I was supposed to be. You were never that. I know that too, she said. Now. He was quiet for a moment. Then, the document flaw. The November template update. Something moved in his eyes. The professional regard again. That specific focused quality. How did you know to look for it? Because I process every administrative document that moves through this building, including the customs authority's quarterly format updates. She held his gaze. I filed the November update notice myself. I was the one who distributed it to the executive team. A pause. I didn't know I'd need it until I did. Minjae looked at her for a moment longer. Then he nodded. A single, small, genuine acknowledgement, and let the officer take his arm and walked out. She watched him go. She thought about him this morning in the lobby with the pastry cart. The specific engineering of his warmth, the calibrated ease, the fingers around her wrist. She tried to feel angry about it and found she was past angry, past the place where anger lived, in the specific exhausted clarity that sat on the other side of a very long night. She had been chosen because she was invisible. She had solved it because she saw everything. Those two facts were about the same person, and she was going to have to spend some time with that. The formal organizational meeting happened at 10 a.m. Dojin called it in the main conference room. Not the 14th floor, not the executive suite, but the formal conference room on the 11th that the senior staff used for quarterly strategy sessions. The room where decisions were documented and witnessed. 11 people attended: Chaewon, Yuna, Choi, Sung-il, 4 senior operations figures whose names Nia was learning in real time, and two members of Haesung International's legitimate legal counsel who had been brought in at 7 a.m. and briefed on the sanitized version of the night's events. And Nia. She sat at the table with a copy of the customs documentation and the manifest folder she'd been carrying since the previous morning, and her own notepad, which had been in her cardigan pocket all night and was now slightly warped from proximity to harbor rain via Dojin's jacket when he'd handed it back to her in the elevator. Dojin ran the meeting the way he ran everything, precisely, economically, without theater. He laid out the current status. Seo Byung-kwan in custody, Min Jae in custody, the weapons secured, the customs documentation under formal administrative review, the 43 contacts relocated and in the process of establishing new operational covers. He laid out the exposure, Haesung International's name in the import documentation, which would require a formal corporate disclosure and the sustained involvement of legal counsel over the next several months. The network map that the SEO family had extracted and transmitted, which meant that the organization's structure would need significant rebuilding regardless of what happened in the courts. He laid out the debt. Not specifically, not the name, not the terms, but the fact of it, that a favor had been called in, that the terms would be set by the creditor, that the organization would need to plan for a significant obligation whose shape was not yet known. The room received this information the way Dojin's room received everything, with the specific composure of people who had trained themselves to process bad news without dramatizing it, because dramatizing it didn't change it. Then he said, "The administrative record that broke the customs chain was identified by Miss Brooks." He didn't say it with particular ceremony, just stated it, the way he stated operational facts, because that's what it was. The document flaw that invalidated the import chain, the subsidiary account pattern that identified the weapons purchase timeline, the terminal layout knowledge that allowed the waterside approach at Busan. These were her work, done in the span of 8 hours with no prior knowledge of the operation she was dismantling. He looked around the table. "I want that on record." The 11 people at the table looked at Nia, not the way the executive floor had always looked at her. Through her, past her, toward whatever was behind her, at her. With the specific quality of attention that recognized something real. Nia looked at the table in front of her for a moment. Then she looked up. "The network needs to be restructured," she said, because that was the work in front of them, and she had been looking at it since 4 a.m., and she had some thoughts. The map that was extracted identified 3 regional hubs and the outer protection network, but it couldn't have captured the full subsidiary architecture because the subsidiary records are distributed across 7 different administrative systems and the malware only ran for 41 minutes. She opened her notepad. "If we're rebuilding, the redundancy structure needs to change. The single-point access that made my workstation valuable as a target, that can't exist in the new architecture." The room was quiet. Yuna said, "What are you proposing?" "Distributed authorization. No single credential touching more than one system layer. The access that I had, and that I had because nobody formalized the scope of my work, and nobody did an authorization review in 2 years. That becomes a structural protocol." She looked at Yuna. "You build the technical architecture. I'll map the administrative documentation structure that needs to exist around it. The two have to be designed together, or one creates vulnerabilities in the other." Yuna looked at Dojin. Dojin said nothing. He was looking at Nia. "I'm available to start today," she said, "after the customs authority call at 2 p.m. Oh Sang-wook needs the supporting documentation for the formal review by end of business." There was a pause. Then Chaewon, who had said nothing in the meeting and who had, in Nia's experience, said very little in any room, said, "She's right about the authorization architecture." He said it to the table, not to anyone specifically. "She's been right about everything." The meeting did not end with applause or formal declarations. It ended the way Dojin's meetings ended, with the next task assigned, the next hour accounted for, the room clearing in purposeful stages. Nia stayed behind. She was looking at her notepad, the page of restructuring notes she'd been building since 4 a.m., when she heard the room empty and the door close. She looked up. Dojin was still at the table. He'd stayed. She didn't know if he'd planned to or if he'd simply not left, the way you sometimes didn't leave a room, because leaving it was a decision that required energy you'd already spent. They looked at each other across the conference table. "You should sleep," he said. "After the 2 p.m. call," she said. "After the 2 p.m. call," he agreed. She looked at him. at the bandaged hand resting on the table, at the suit jacket he'd changed into at 6 a.m., a different jacket, because the one from last night was beyond salvage, and the open collar of the shirt underneath it, the absence of a tie, which she had noticed this morning in his office 24 hours ago and which now felt like 24 years ago. "The apartment in Mapogu," she said, "where I've been living." He looked at her. "I'm going to keep living there," she said. "For now. Because I need a place to live and it's a good apartment and I'm not—" She stopped, organized the sentence. "I'm not going to make any decisions I don't need to make right now." "All right," he said, "but I know you own the building." "Yes. And I'm going to need the actual lease to be in my name, formalized, real documentation." She held his gaze. "I can't live in a place I don't officially exist in. I've spent 2 years officially not existing in things that turned out to be about me. I'm done with that." He looked at her for a moment. Something moved across his face. Not the chairman's face, not the controlled register, the other one, the one she'd been learning to read. "Yes," he said, "and the building manager, Cho. I'll introduce you. I want his actual contact information, in case something breaks." Dojin looked at her with the expression she still didn't have a complete word for. She was building the word incrementally, the way you built things that didn't have existing templates, from components, tested against reality, revised when the fit was wrong. So far the word contained attention and relief, and something older and more precise that she wasn't ready to name yet, because naming it meant deciding what to do about it. And she had agreed not to make decisions she didn't need to make right now. "Yes," he said. "To all of it." She looked at her notepad. "The restructuring will take at least 3 months. The customs review, longer. The debt you've called in—" She paused. "I want to know the terms when they come. Whatever he names, I want to know." "Why?" "Because if it's terms that involve this organization, it involves me now." She said it simply, without performance, because it was simply true. "I'm not peripheral. You said that this morning. I'm holding you to it." He was quiet for a long moment. "Yes," he said. Outside the conference room window, Seoul was doing what it did, existing at volume, dense and indifferent. The Han River visible at the far edge of the skyline. The same flat gray-silver it had been at 6:30 yesterday morning when she'd sat at her desk with the February manifest and the coffee she hadn't drunk, and the nagging feeling of a weight variance that didn't distribute randomly. She thought about that version of herself. The dark cardigan, the practiced invisibility, the 26-year architecture of taking up less space. She wasn't angry at that version. That version had survived using the tools she'd had. That version had sat in the same city for 2 years, memorizing manifests and custom schedules and subsidiary account structures that nobody asked her to memorize, doing the work that nobody watched her do. That version had, it turned out, been building the exact tools she needed for the night she'd just survived. You didn't waste a version of yourself. You just eventually grew into the next one. The 2 p.m. call with Oh Sang-wook ran 40 minutes. Nia delivered the supporting documentation for the formal administrative review with the methodical precision of someone who had been organizing complex documentation for a long time and understood exactly how a government official needed information presented in order to process it without creating grounds for procedural challenge. Oh Sang-wook asked 12 questions. She answered all 12. He confirmed the formal notice of hold would be upheld pending investigation and that the Customs Division would be initiating an internal review of the officer reassignment that had facilitated the fraudulent approval. When she hung up, she sat for a moment in the 14th floor room with the phone in her hand. Then she put the phone down and put her head back against the chair and closed her eyes. She was asleep in approximately 90 seconds, which was faster than she'd ever fallen asleep in her life, and which was the body's simple accounting for approximately 32 hours without rest. She didn't dream, or if she did, she didn't remember. She woke to the sound of the room being very quiet. It was 4:15 p.m. The monitors were running at reduced brightness. Yuna was at her station with headphones on. The overhead lights had been dimmed. There was a blanket over her that had not been there when she fell asleep. She did not ask where it came from. She knew where it came from. She folded it carefully and set it on the edge of the desk, and stood up and went to the workstation to look at the customs status updates, because the work was the thing that was always there, and the work needed doing. 3 weeks later, the customs authorities' formal investigation concluded that the transfer request for Park Jun-suk's reassignment had been fraudulently submitted. The supporting documentation, including the template discrepancy and the signature chain irregularities identified in the subsequent review, was sufficient to invalidate all approvals issued under his authority at Busan Port during the relevant period. The weapons in containers KBSN 441 through 447 were reclassified and transferred to national authority custody. The investigation into their origin and intended use was ongoing and outside the scope of anything Haesung International's legal counsel needed to address. The corporate disclosure process was lengthy and careful, and managed by people who were very good at making corporate disclosures that said exactly what needed to be said. Haesung International's name appeared in the investigation record as a victim of credential fraud. The legal exposure that remained was residual and manageable and diminishing. Han Soo-chang cooperated fully and completely with the investigation. His cooperation was noted in the record. His daughter's situation was resolved through means that left no documentation, which was a feature of operating in a world where some resolutions happen in the space between the written and the unwritten. He resigned from his position without fanfare and took a job in Daejeon and was not heard from again in any context that mattered to anyone in this story. Min Jae's case moved through processes that were partly formal and partly not, in the way of cases that existed on the border between the documented world and the other one. He was, by any measure, going to be a long time in one kind of custody or another. The professional regard he'd shown Nia at the end was the last thing she'd received from him, and she held it with appropriate distance, as information about the man, not as absolution for what he'd done. The Seo family's operation sustained damage it would spend years recovering from. Not fatal damage. These things were rarely fatal, but the structural kind, the kind that required rebuilding from the foundation, and Seo Byung-kwan was not available to oversee the rebuilding. The debt to the old man came due 6 weeks after Busan. The terms were specific, bounded, and not what Dojin had feared. A single concession, a territorial agreement in the southern ports, a yield on a specific shipping route that the old man had wanted for a decade, and that Dojin had held out of strategic stubbornness rather than operational necessity. He gave it up in a meeting that lasted 20 minutes in a room without windows, and when he came out, Nia was waiting in the car, and he got in and closed the door and said, "It's done." She said, "What did it cost?" He told her. She looked at the specific route on the map she'd pulled up on her phone. She looked at the traffic through the southern port projections she'd internalized over 2 years of logistics work. She said, "We can reroute the Nara subsidiary traffic through the Incheon Channel without significant timeline impact. The cost differential is offset by the reduction in port handling fees at the southern terminals." He looked at her. "I've been looking at it since you told me about the debt," she said. "I wanted to know what the options were." She put the phone away. "We're fine." He looked at her for a long time in the back of the car while Seoul moved around them, at the face that he had watched through glass for 2 years. The same face and not the same face, because the face had not changed, but the way she inhabited it had, the way you inhabited a face differently once you stopped trying to make it smaller. "Nia," he said. "Don't do it dramatically," she said. "Whatever you're about to do." He almost smiled. "I wasn't." "You were." She looked out the window. "You were going to say something you've been carrying for 2 years in a car outside an old man's building, and it was going to be—" She paused. "Too much for a car." He was quiet. "Say it somewhere with a window," she said. "I want to see the river when you say it." Well, he said it with the river visible. Not from the chairman's office, she had asked, specifically, for somewhere that wasn't the chairman's office, because the chairman's office was where he'd been the most controlled, and she wanted him to be the least controlled. He chose the 6th floor of the Mapo building, which was now formally leased in her name with real documentation, with the reflective windows that let the evening light in without letting the city see you back. The Han River was doing what it did at evening, catching the light at an angle that made it look deliberate, purposeful, the way rivers look when you're watching them from somewhere safe. He stood at the window. She stood next to him. He said what he'd been carrying, and he said it without theater, without the chairman's controlled register, without any of the architecture he'd built around himself in 32 years of operating in a world that punished visible weakness. He said it in plain language, specific and unembellished, The way you said things that were simply true and had been true for a long time and were no longer going to be held in the place where you kept things that were too heavy to put down. He told her that he had seen her on her third day in the building, standing at the coffee machine in the break room, trying to read the instructions in Korean and doing it very carefully, the way a person read something they didn't want to have to ask about. He had stood in the hallway for approximately 45 seconds and watched her read the machine and figure it out and make her coffee and turn around and find him standing there, at which point she had apologized for being in the break room, for making coffee, for existing in his immediate vicinity in a manner that he might have found inconvenient. He told her that he had thought about that apology for the rest of the day. He told her the rest of it. Not all of it in a single speech. It came in pieces, the way true things came when you were not performing them, with stops and adjustments and the occasional wrong word corrected and replaced. The apartment, the security camera, the man at the station, the fact that he had watched her work for 2 years with the specific helpless attention of someone who could not look away and had no language for why. He told her that he had not known how to stop. He told her that he had not, if he was honest, tried very hard to stop. She listened to all of it. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. She was looking at the river, not at him. He let her look. He had gotten very good in the past 3 weeks at giving her the space to process things at her own pace rather than at the pace his anxiety would prefer, and this was one of the things she had not told him to do, but that she had indicated with various looks and silences was appreciated. "The man at the station," she said, "the one who followed me." "Yes." "You said he was arrested for an unrelated charge." "Yes." "Was it actually unrelated?" He was quiet. "Dojin." "No," he said. She looked at the river. "Okay." A pause. I'm not going to tell you that every choice you made in those 2 years was the right choice, because some of them weren't. Some of them were choices you made because you could make them without asking, and that's..." She stopped, organized it. "That's something we're going to have to talk about. Not tonight, but at some point." "Yes," he said. "I need you to mean that." "I mean it." She looked at him. At the bandaged hand which was healing, the cut closing into the beginnings of a scar that would always be there. At the face that she had been learning to read for the past 3 weeks. Not the chairman's face, and not the other one, but the specific face of a man who was, for possibly the first time in a very long time, not performing anything for anyone. "I'm not invisible," she said. "No," he said. "You never were." "I know that now." She looked back at the river. "I'm going to need some time to get used to it, to being seen." She paused. "And I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to be wrong about things. I'm not going to perform being the right person for this. Whatever this is." She looked at him. "I'm just going to be who I actually am, which includes being wrong sometimes and stubborn often, and I reorganized your filing system without asking, and I'm not sorry." He looked at her. "I know," he said. "You don't get to decide things about my life without asking," she said. "Not anymore. Not about where I live or who's watching me or anything. You ask." "Yes." "And I'll tell you yes or no, and you'll accept both." "Yes." She held his gaze for a moment. Then she looked back at the river. The evening light was doing something specific to the water, making it look settled, unhurried, the way water looked when the weather had finished with it, and it was returning to itself. The city moved beyond it, indifferent and enormous, and entirely unconcerned with the 2 people standing at a window in Mapogu, having a conversation that had taken 2 years to start. "Okay," she said finally. "Just that." "Okay." He said nothing. He was very still. She could feel the stillness of him at the edge of her peripheral vision, the specific stillness that was different from his controlled stillness, different from the chairman's stillness, the stillness of someone who has just put down something very heavy and is standing in the new quiet of having done it. She was not invisible. She was not the clumsy secretary who apologized for existing in rooms where she was, it turned out, the most important person present. She was not the soft target, not the peripheral access vehicle, not the unremarkable woman that anyone, Minjae, or the executive floor, or 2 years of her own careful self-reduction, had taken her for. She was Nia Brooks, 26 years old, who had spent 2 years memorizing every administrative document that moved through one of Seoul's largest corporations and the criminal organization it concealed, and who had used those 2 years' worth of knowledge to dismantle an 8-month operation in 8 hours with a whiteboard and a phone and the November Customs template update she'd filed herself. She was the woman who had found the thread. She had learned something in the past 3 weeks about what it meant to be seen. It wasn't comfortable, not entirely. Being seen meant being accountable for what you got right, for what you got wrong, for the choices you made and the ones you didn't make fast enough. It meant the mistakes were visible and the fears were visible, and the particular specific shape of who you actually were, unflattened by the effort to take up less space, was visible too. It meant that when you stood at a window looking at a river, the person next to you saw you looking. She could live with that. She was, she thought, going to have to learn how to live with quite a lot of new things. The lease in her name, the building manager's actual contact information, the 3 months of restructuring work, and the ongoing customs review, and the organizational rebuilding that was going to require the same kind of meticulous attention to administrative detail that she had been applying quietly and without recognition for 2 years. Except that now the recognition was present, and she was going to have to decide what to do with it. She was going to have to decide, incrementally and carefully and without rushing, what she was and wasn't willing to be part of. What this world asked of her, and what she was prepared to give, and where the lines were that she would hold. Those were not small decisions. She was not going to make them in a car or at a window or in the specific exhausted clarity of having survived a very long night, but she was going to make them. That was the thing. That was the thing that was different from this morning 2 years ago, and this morning 3 weeks ago, and every morning before them. She was going to make the decisions out loud with her name on them. Not have them made around her by people who thought she wouldn't notice. Not apologize for needing to be consulted. Not smile and deflect and minimize until the room forgot she was there. She was going to be there. She looked at the Han River in the evening light and felt the specific weight of Dojin standing next to her. The solid, complicated, imperfect weight of a person who had loved her badly and well simultaneously, and who was standing here now prepared, she believed, to do better. She believed it. That was something. Outside, Seoul kept moving in its enormous, indifferent way. The river caught the last of the evening light and held it for a moment, the way water held things briefly before the current took them. Nia Brooks stood at the window and held it too. The invisible secretary had taken up her space at last. She wasn't going to apologize for it, not to anyone, not ever again.